In 2007, Paul Thomas Anderson wrote and directed There Will Be Blood, one of the best films of the century, starring Daniel Day-Lewis and arguably one of the greatest performances in cinema history as Daniel Plainview. Hello, movie friends. Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost Podcast, the ultimate film and TV podcast. We are very excited to be talking about one of the greatest films of all time, my personal favorite movie, There Will Be Blood. And it's kind of hard to even think about where to start, but I just know it's going to be a good episode. I'm really excited. I've seen this movie many, many times. You as well. We just watched it again yesterday as a refresher. I might be closing in on 20 watches of the film by now, but I've talked about it on the podcast. There Will Be Blood was a life-changing movie for me. It made me change my perspective on cinema for so many reasons, and it's one of my favorite films to revisit.
Congratulations on 20 watches. That's really impressive. Don't sell us short. This is going to be more than a good episode, Anthony. This is going to be a great episode because this is a masterpiece from this century, one of the few, and probably Paul Thomas Anderson's best movie. It's like between this and Boogie Nights for me personally.
Oh, for sure.
Such a terrific filmmaker. One of the best working today. Came out in 2007. Rotten Tomatoes has There Will Be Blood listed at a 91% score for critics and an 86% score for audiences. On IMDb, it is an 8.2, putting it at number 138 on the all-time IMDb user rating list on a budget of $25 million. This film had a worldwide gross of $76 million. Even after its $190,000 opening weekend, it just started taking off. Word of mouth, Oscar buzz got this movie hyped up for audiences everywhere. This film garnered 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Actor, Best Director, Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Cinematographer. It took home 2 statues, obviously for Daniel Day-Lewis as Daniel Plainview, winning Best Actor of the Year, and then Robert Elswit for Best Cinematography. Based on Oil, there's an explanation point in the title. That's why I screamed it, by Upton Sinclair. But There Will Be Blood is basically the first 150-ish pages of that book, and then PTA kind of created his own story with the characters, what would happen, and it follows a oil prospector turned oil tycoon and his rise to power in America in the late 19th and early 20th century.
And it has a 4.4 on Letterboxd, which is very good. This is, I would say, I haven't looked them up, but I'm pretty sure this is the most successful film Paul Thomas Anderson has ever made. For the masterworks he's crafted, they never generate too much of a box office, but they do, for the most part, make enough money for him to keep making movies, which is very important. And this also marked the second film in the major shift in terms of his filmmaking style. So Paul Thomas Anderson was a huge fan of Robert Altman, who was an incredible filmmaker, one of the greatest American filmmakers of all time. He made a lot of films in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and his films featured ensemble casts, interweaving storylines, and then great dialogue and very specific kind of personalities for the characters. Now, this is obviously sounds very much like some of PTA's early films. He's talking about Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Hard 8, which is also called Sydney. He was such a fan of Robert Altman that he was infusing that into his filmmaking. And then things changed with Punch Drunk Love when he came out with this solitary film about one individual person, which is very different from anything he had done before, following one lead character for the majority of the film. It was basically a character study on this human being. It's one of his Adam Sandler's best performances, if not his very best. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It came out after Magnolia and before There Will Be Blood, but it marked the change. And then There Will Be Blood, I think, was the final beat in evolution for Paul Thomas Anderson in terms of his filmmaking, because then he put that into a period piece setting, which is he's now just done period pieces ever since There Will Be Blood. Boogie Nights was a period piece, obviously, but it still had the gigantic ensemble interweaving storylines. But with There Will Be Blood, we have a central figure, character study on a specific human being and their story from, especially in this case, from their rise to their fall. Obviously, Paul Dano as Eli and Paul Sunday has quite a lot of screen time in this film as well, but it is Daniel Plainview's film, and from start to finish, you're with him. So ultimately, this was Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, coming into his own as a filmmaker and especially as a writer, and what I would say is his greatest achievement as a director.
I completely agree. The film was produced by Ghoulardi Film Company and distributed by Paramount Vantage and Miramax Films. At the 2008 Berlin International Film Festival, it won the Silver Bear Award for Best Director and a Special Artistic Contribution Award for Johnny Greenwood and his musical score. Paul Thomas Anderson had been working on a screenplay about two fighting families before he figured out how to write this movie. He struggled with the script and soon realized it wasn't working. While he was living in London and homesick, he purchased a copy of Oil and drew on the first 150 pages for inspiration, and that's where he created the story of There'll Be Blood, focusing mostly on the character of Daniel Plainview from the book, although the book is pretty different than the movie for sure. Daniel Plainview probably isn't as much of a villain as you would picture him as in the movie.
So the book, it's actually told through H.W.'s perspective.
And I believe H.W. has a different name. I think he's called Bunny in that.
I can't remember. I read the book after I watched the film.
I think his name is Bunny in the book. So, but he does nefarious things in the book. However, it's more of just trying to survive amongst these oil tycoons and magnates that pretty much force him to do bad things. Some other differences is, let's see, H.W. is his biological son in the book rather than in the film. He is an adopted son. Daniel also has an ex-wife in the book who is alive. And Eli is a lot less destitute, and Daniel doesn't kill him at the end of the film. Spoiler alert.
and it does get more into politics and just corporate culture in the latter half of the book, which PTA obviously strays away from with his film. It keeps it very smaller in scope and just focusing solely on the trajectory of this character on his own. And Paul Thomas Anderson had said that he had liked to work with Daniel Day-Lewis, and he wrote the screenplay with Day-Lewis in mind, then approached the actor when the script was nearly complete.
He never met him.
Never met. However, he didn't know this, but Daniel Day-Lewis was actually a big fan of Punch Drunk Love, which he had seen in 2004 when that film came out. I believe it's 2004. And Anderson had heard that he liked Punch Drunk Love, so it gave him the confidence to send Day-Lewis a copy of the incomplete script of There'll Be Blood. Now, according to Day-Lewis, being asked to do the film was enough to convince him to say yes. And then in an interview with the New York Observer, he elaborated that what drew him to the project was the understanding that Paul Thomas Anderson had entered into that world completely. He wasn't just observing it, he had entered into it, and he indeed had populated it with characters who had lived their own lives. So Paul Thomas Anderson did a ton of research. He said in a quote, I can remember that the way my desk looked with so many different scraps of paper and books about the oil industry in the early 20th century mixed with pieces of other scripts that I had written. Everything was coming from so many different sources, but the book was a great stepping stone. It was so cohesive that way. Upton Sinclair wrote about that period and his experiences around the oil fields and these independent oilmen. That said, the book is so long that only the first 100 or so pages, like James said, ended up being used. But Paul Thomas Anderson didn't actually get the rights to Oil. Another person had actually purchased the rights and started looking for a director to collaborate with. And then Paul Thomas Anderson, hearing this, reached out to that person who owned the rights to Oil, and that's how he got the rights to make the film. Now, before we get into the rest of our episode, I want to let you guys know we are doing a movie poster giveaway thanks to movieposters.com. In order to enter this contest, head on over to our YouTube channel and make a comment in the There Will Be Blood episode that will enter you into the contest to win a free movie poster of your choosing. Good luck, everybody. Now let's get back into There Will Be Blood.
And there's so many jumping points to take off from when talking about There Will Be Blood. And it's tough to pick one, but I would say, why don't we just start with Paul Thomas Anderson and what he brings to the table as a filmmaker and what sets him apart from the rest of people making movies today, whether it's Hollywood or international films. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is one of the best American filmmakers right now. No one really makes movies that like him, where he's kind of still this classical filmmaker in a lot of ways, and he's such a brilliant screenwriter, but also creator and developer of characters, and he really knows how to connect an audience not just to a story but to a character really effectively. I mean, when you watch There Will Be Blood, the first 40 minutes of that movie, you feel nothing but connection and empathy for Daniel Plainview until you grow to hate him as well as loving him at the same time. So very few filmmakers can make you feel the emotions he does with the characters he creates. Plus, his directing is so controlled and unique and inventive in a lot of ways. I love how he always moves his camera. He's not afraid of long takes. He's not afraid of long shots, wide shots, close-ups. He does everything so expertly. Center frame filmmaking. He just knows exactly what he wants, and he seems like to just be an ultimate surgeon technician when he's making a movie. And in addition to all of that, Whether he's working with Johnny Greenwood or just using music as a soundtrack, he is brilliant at selecting and finding the right music for his movies.
Yeah, to build off of that, I think that PTA is defined by his naturalism. And what I mean by that is he doesn't like his films to look too stylized. Obviously, this film has a great style to it, but it is grounded in a lot of reality. He actually, for this film, he asked the DP, Robert Ellsworth, and his crew to take off any filters that were on top of lenses. He didn't want anything to be artificial. They actually used a few vintage lenses for this film. He believes in lighting naturalistically, trying to use as much natural light as possible, or practical light, and so setting up lights within a scene practically so that they're actually visible. There's no BS with his filmmaking, and all of his films have that. And he hasn't really changed his filmmaking style. And to this point in his career with his last two films, he's actually acted as the DP of his films with his former gaffer, who now is his collaborative DP. They're a two-person cinematographer, basically. And with his films, this film in particular, you can see it's rough, it's gritty. There's nothing clean about the images, but nonetheless they're still so beautiful. And like you said, to the control, it might not look like it, but there is an insane amount of control, especially with someone like Robert Ellsworth, who is an Oscar winner, and he's also shot many of other PTA's other films, as well as a lot of other incredible looking films. He is one of the best DPs working today and of all time. You look at this film, and like you said with the long takes, not only are they long takes, but the way that they're moving the camera. Take, for example, the Paul Sunday scene when Paul walks in. You have 4 different camera setups, and the camera never cuts. It's just constantly slowly moving through the scene, different angles, and approaching the actors slowly. And it kind of feels like voyeuristic and as if you're watching the scene take place. Also, with this film, which I really appreciate, is it's very non-traditional the way he shoots in this movie. He's not constantly doing a one-shot reverse shot, which means a shot of an actor, then another shot of the other actor, and then cutting them together. In this film, he's not afraid to keep one actor speaking from behind the camera, like behind the camera, or also filming a character from behind while they're speaking. There are multiple shots which are long takes. An example of this is when Henry shows up at Daniel's door, and then most of that scene is filmed from behind Daniel Day-Lewis's head. And they're carrying out most of that dialogue. You're not even seeing Day-Lewis's face. This happens multiple times in the film, especially with Paul Dano's character, Eli Sunday. Paul Thomas Anderson knows that we don't have to do the constant editing. We don't constantly have to be looking at someone's face. Sometimes it's better to hold on one character to really feel a sense for the scene and get their reaction to a vast amount of dialogue. And then with that scene in particular, then he just cuts to a 2-shot wide with both characters in frame. That's the rest of that scene. So 2 very simple setups, very long takes, but you're getting so much power and so much nuance to the scene. You don't need 16 different setups. He doesn't want to do an establishing wide, medium, close up. Like, he doesn't want to do 7 shots of a scene. He understands that you can actually have more impact by doing less. And so less is more seems to always be his approach to lighting, to framing, to different kinds of lenses. And so I really appreciate that. It makes it feel like he's grounding all of his movies in realism, but it's also so well crafted. And getting back to the style, there's a lot of Steadicam work in this film, but PTA shoots it kind of shaky. And so there's a lot of sequences where the camera is pushing in, clearly with the Steadicam, and he doesn't want it to be smooth, but he wants it just to rumble a little bit. It's not exactly shaking, but it's just like slowly bouncing around. And it kind of feels like it's like grounded where you're moving, it's handheld, but it's not shaky, it's not too distracting, but it makes you feel the grittiness of the moments.
Yeah, it depends on the moment as well, because then it's a very smooth push in and sequence changing when Paul Sunday comes to see Fletcher and Daniel and offers the land location for money, and that's a very slow, controlled camera movement. Depending on the scene, that's a very controlled scene. And he's always treated the camera like a character, like in an amusement park seat or something like that, because he's always moving the camera. And he's done it in all of his movies. Like the opening sequence of Boogie Nights, one of the most incredible achievements in cinematography I've ever seen in my entire life.
Oh, and I'm sorry, just to interrupt. Getting back to Robert Altman, he was also famous for very long takes, which interwove multiple characters, especially to set up characters for the film. Even in his opening shot, The Player is a big example of that.
It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of work and a lot of planning. I love the opening shot of Boogie Nights. And even something as simple as one of my favorite shots in Punch Drunk Love, when Adam Sandler's character, I forgot his name, he's sitting alone in his apartment, and I believe it's when he's on the phone with the call service, and he's just being very awkward talking to them, and he's sitting at a table. It's like in his Studio City apartment in Los Angeles, which is where Paul Thomas Anderson moved to. Barry's sitting at the table on the phone, and there's 2 chairs at the table, and the camera is pushing in very slowly on Barry. We're watching him on the phone, and then it just turns to the empty chair for like several seconds, and then turns back to Barry. And so many people, I feel like, get confused about that shot. And I've seen it on film Twitter a lot, where people they're like, why is he doing this? It's like, because he's showing how lonely the character is. He's using the camera as a thematic tool to explain things to us about the character. And he's always done that with his camera work.
You look at that dining room table and that chair, it's always an empty seat. And that's what PTA is saying with this. And he actually does something similar. So it's not exactly a trademark of his, but he uses it in very important moments. He actually uses it in the opening monologue for Daniel Plainview. He's giving
Plainview.
Did I say Danny?
Yeah.
Daniel Plainview.
Boston's coming out.
He's giving his speech to that first town that has a new gusher, and he gives his great monologue. But what happens is, like you said, like the Paul Sunday scene, PTA and Ellsworth, they slowly go from a medium wide and they slowly push in on Daniel and then HW, who's standing beside him.
Yeah, he goes to the HW for several seconds.
Exactly, so that's what I'm getting at. He tilts the camera, and it slowly just puts the attention and centers HW, and then it goes back to Daniel. By the time it gets back to Daniel, it's a close-up of him, and perfectly timed Daniel Day-Lewis, his monologue ends right when the camera stops on his face. So it's perfectly timed with intention. And what PTA is saying, just like with the Punch Drunk Love scene, he's showcasing the isolation of Barry, the lack of having a partner with the empty chair. With this scene, PTA and Ellsworth are showcasing that HW is a kind of a distraction for the crowds, for townspeople, for landowners, where they're not just looking at this intimidating oil man who seems to be like, oh, he's just trying to get our money. Oh, they're a regular family business, like Daniel Plainview just said. They're seeing the cute face to help sell it. And then with the camera moving in that direction, PTA and Ellsworth are making us feel that as well.
Damn, I wanted to bring that up so bad. I wanted to bring that up.
Gotcha.
He got me. He got there first.
Beat ya.
I was like, the HW thing, I know it's going to...
If you ain't first, you're last.
It's going to make me sound so smart.
I piss excellence.
That's a great way of making us feel like the camera's a character, like we're in the audience, and like Anthony said, because HW is just a cute face to buy land and to make oil.
And in terms of natural lighting, there's actually a lot of overblooming in this film, which means light is being blown out. Most often natural light, from whether it be the sun behind Daniel or the sun pouring into the crucifix window in Eli's church. And this is something where so many filmmakers, so many DPs, they'll be like, oh, we can't blow anything out. We can't blow anything out. Everything has to be caught in the frame. And
perfectly exposed.
Yeah, perfectly
everything.
Exposed. Like, everything needs to be exposed. We can't have any overblown or blooming things in lights. But PTA is like, it's natural. He's not trying to control the set too much. He's trying to actually reduce the control, hence getting rid of filters on the lenses or anything that can affect the image outside of just the plain lens that they're using. And so PTA and Ellsworth, they're happy to blow out the image as long as it tells something, makes you feel something. And in a lot of ways, I actually prefer it, because that's natural life. If you stare at the sun, it's gonna get blown out. So there's really no point in always perfectly exposing something like an extremely heavy light source like the sun or like a lamp in the frame. So for me, it makes a lot of sense, and they do some really incredible silhouetting and backlighting in this film with the overblooming.
You know, that gets me really excited about Oppenheimer, because so many studios and filmmakers, they're probably just too afraid to have overexposed sections or parts of their frames in a shot because, you know, maybe they don't think it'll look good to an audience. But if it makes sense, it makes sense, because when you're looking at, obviously, cameras on our eyes. Our eyes are so powerful at light exposure. Cameras might get there someday. They're pretty good these days. But, I mean, once you're exposing light for something like an interior of the church, the light pouring in is going to get blown out. But it looks fine, because that's what we're used to if you've ever held a camera or taken photos. I mean, we've all taken videos and photos with our smartphones, and that happens. There's different exposure. It also explains why there are no stars on the moon photography from the lunar landings. Like, that's why, because they're exposing for the moon, which is a lot brighter, so they have to bring that f-stop super down, and it blacks out all the sky and the stars behind them. That's why you can't see stars in the lunar landing. It wasn't shot in a studio. But
Great point.
But that gets me excited about Oppenheimer, because My favorite poster and image from Oppenheimer is Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer with the goggles on. Half that poster is overexposed in orange because the color scheme is orange, but it's so overexposed because the power of the sun's in front of these characters. It should be overexposed, and I can't wait to see if Christopher Nolan will take advantage of overexposing frames, because he had experienced a lot with overexposure filmmaking with Wally Pfister. Used to like to shoot overexposed for a lot of sequences, especially with movies like The Dark Knight Rises and Inception. Lots of overexposure that you can fix in post to just get some more information from his perspective. So some filmmakers like to overexpose, but I can't wait to see what he does with Oppenheimer in that perspective.
I guarantee that's just still from the film that they turn into a poster.
100%.
It would only make sense to showcase the power, the magnitude of the light in the source by showcasing how, even because the human eye, we wouldn't be able to perceive that light. It would blow us out. So it would make sense to overexpose it on film and really blow out most of the image. And I guarantee a lot of those sequences, there's going to be plenty of overblown shots. And
wear your sunglasses, Top.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. So I have some info on the actual cameras while we're on the topic of the production with the camera work.
Yeah, I'll stay on cinematography.
So it was shot on Panavision Panaflex Millennium camera and also a Panavision Panaflex Platinum 35mm cameras. Both are 35mm, sorry. And so these are two of Panavision's most reliable cameras. Speaking of Chris Nolan, he only shoots on Panavision until he started shooting on IMAX. All of his films before going fully IMAX, always Panavision.
That's why they have a similar look in addition to the film stock they choose, but these were made in 1999. They're really great film cameras.
Mm-hmm. So the Platinum camera in particular, it allows for a 1,000-foot film magazine to be extended onto it, so you can shoot for several minutes instead of about, 5 to 7 minutes for a typical magazine of film.
I have no idea.
You could film with this. I think you could film up to 15 to 20 minutes with this. And PTA loving long takes, I'm sure that was very instrumental to making that decision. Ellsworth used two film stocks for the production: the Kodak Vision 2 50D for daylight photography, and the Kodak Vision 2 200T for nighttime photography, which is a slightly more sensitive stock, but they'll have the same color palette. And then the lenses were Super Panavision high-speed anamorphic lenses, hence the very widescreen look, and then vintage path lenses for what Ellsworth said were 6 or 7 shots, which created that vignette. So in particular with the oil derrick on fire, how the red and orange bloom goes around the frame, vignetted, it's because they're using a vintage lens for those sequences. And I think those are some of the most incredible looking shots of the film. Really sensational. It makes you feel like the setting, the period. You know, when filmmakers use vintage lenses, Nolan has a couple actually. Wes Anderson likes to use a lot of vintage lenses. Robert Eggers is using vintage lenses for Nosferatu. It makes you feel like you're being transported to that world, to that period setting, to that time from the past by using the actual filmmaking technology from that time. So I think it's brilliant, fantastic. It doesn't matter that the image doesn't look perfect, doesn't look completely crisp and up to standards, if that is such a thing that you could say, modern standards, because I love it. And it suits, like I said, PTA's philosophy of realism, grittiness, and naturalism.
Yeah, and another filmmaker, cinematographer that's dabbled in vintage lenses is Roger Deakins with Assassination of Jesse James.
Oh, yeah.
Tons of sequences of these beautiful vintage lenses, getting these shots of Jesse James, Brad Pitt in the fields. Those are some of my favorite moments from the film. It really, like you said, puts you in that time period, because it's like looking at those old Vivillian vintage photos from like the 1910s, 1920s, the oldest photos that you can find that you've seen. And, I believe that that 6 shots from the film were used in the final cut with the vintage lens that they used on their cameras.
Of There Will Be Blood?
Yeah.
Yeah, I said that.
Oh, did you say 6?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I said 6 or 7.
I was so entranced that I was like...
But speaking of the Jesse James film, so Deakins shot that with Andrew Dominic, the director. They actually wanted to use more of that, but they ended up just using those lenses for transitional periods of the time period. And what this lens does is, that lens in particular had a very short focal length, so it was not most of the image was not in focus, which added to it. It made it feel like it was like the kind of lens they would use on a tintype photograph. You know what I mean? And it looks fantastic in the film, but the studio actually asked them to cut out a lot of them, unfortunately. But I think they really add to the film, especially a film like this. And another thing that PTA does so well is his writing. His writing has always been spectacular. He has a couple of Oscar nominations. I think that Boogie Nights, Magnolia, There Will Be Blood, The Master is really so well written. I mean, he is really such an impressive writer. for fiction and for filmmaking, his characters are so memorable. And even like lesser known characters of his, like Frank Mackey, Tom Cruise's character in Magnolia. What a sensational character to put on screen. It's I think one of his best characters he's ever written.
Even the Mattress Man in Punch Drunk Love.
Mattress Man's fantastic. And then Daniel Plainview is probably, it could be his greatest achievement as a writer. And then also Eli Sunday is really fantastic. But what I like the most about There Will Be Blood is it really is two characters being pitted against each other. Obviously, H.W. has a big role in this film, and he does actually disappear for quite some time when Daniel sends him away because of his injury, not knowing how to deal with this son who can no longer hear. He's not a real giver of comfort or love, and so he just basically abandons him in a way. So
I have a reason why.
Nice. We can
get into that in a little bit.
So PTA as a writer, I think, is oftentimes understated because it's different to be a director and then to be a writer-director. And I think it's a special thing. Obviously, a lot of directors are putting input into the screenplays and helping develop scripts. Like Martin Scorsese, he's only written a few scripts that he's directed, but he actually develops scripts. And he'll hire a writer and be like, okay, let's write this script, whether it be like Wolf of Wall Street or something else. And he'll hire a director and they'll develop it over time. And he's constantly reading the drafts, giving notes, giving ideas, and helping structure the script from day one. So he's actually doing that quite a lot, but he never gives himself credit. He would never want to. The writer's doing a lot of the writing. I mean, The Departed is another example. And then you have a director like Paul Thomas Anderson or like Quentin Tarantino, where this piece of work it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the director. You know what I mean? Like, they wrote it. Every word of it is them. And in a way, it's a special kind of director and something that I think is getting more common nowadays, where directors are, I think, more often than not writing the movies they're making, I would say. I think back in the day, it was more of like they were separate jobs, kind of, from what I can tell. But I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is one of the most impressive. And before I really discovered most of Scorsese's work, Paul Thomas Anderson was my favorite director for a very long time. But I just kept getting drawn to a lot of Scorsese's classic films and films from the past, and really, I just was like, this guy's the best. This guy's the best. But for a very long time, PTA was my guy, and he's still my guy. He's my number two. And in terms of recent directors, I think, honestly, he's the top of the food chain for American filmmakers in the past 20 years. He's number one.
Maybe if you discovered Marty's films at a younger age, Paul Thomas Anderson's, you'd have a Travis Bickle signature on your arm instead of a Daniel Plainview signature on your forearm.
Well, it is still my favorite film.
Okay, that's true. Now, principal photography of this film took place in Marfa, Texas, began in June 2006. It went on for about 3 months. And other locations took place in Los Angeles. Famously, this film was shooting at the same time as No Country for Old Men.
Let's talk about that for a bit.
And obviously, these two were competing at the Oscars for Best Picture and all these awards. And Best Supporting Actor went to No Country for Old Men. Best Leading Actor went to There Will Be Blood. So there's kind of a back and forth of who would win Best Picture and all these awards and everything. They were easily the two best films of the year and arguably two of the best films of the century, hands down. And we actually did an episode of them together back in 2020, I think.
An early one.
I think the
early
first
days.
year of the podcast, we did There Will Be Blood versus No Country for Old Men, and I'm sure many of you listened to that, and we are so grateful if you discovered us from that episode and the TikTok clips and you enjoyed it. That was such a fun episode because those are two of our personal all-time favorite movies, both in our top 25, right? For you, No Country?
No Country's a perfect movie,
yeah,
absolutely.
So these are two perfect movies. They're so similar, but also different in many ways. And aesthetically, they're very much connected as well. They have very similar color palettes, especially There Will Be Blood, which we can talk about as well. But I just
shot in the same locations,
same areas, and with that famous story that I'm sure everyone's heard about. You've probably seen like an Instagram movie fact or like a TikTok.
Did you know
that they were filming at the same time, very close locations? And There Will Be Blood, the sequence where they had to light the oil derrick on fire for the oil derrick explosion, and they were creating these massive plumes of black smoke in the sky during the daytime. They did different colors at nighttime for better photography and low light situations.
Oh, wow, interesting.
So they had different mixtures depending on the time of day. So during the daytime, massive black clouds of plume smoke in the air. Had to shut down production on No Country for Old Men for like 2 days because they could see it in the background of where they were filming.
I'm sure the logistics actually wasn't that bad because both movies were made by the same companies, Miramax and Paramount Vantage. So I'm sure that the producers of both movies were like, this is whatever. We'll just tell them to delay. But I'm sure if it was like different studios, different companies, rivals, I'm sure it could have been a little more dramatic and more conflicting if that happened. Like
maybe a lawsuit.
Like no lawsuit happened because the same company. Like, who are you going to sue, yourself?
They're probably
so I'm sure that helped.
That was so bad for the environment what they did on There Will Be Blood. You gotta find them, Hollywood. But they use different mixtures. So the date when the sun's still up and the oil derrick's on fire, it's black smoke. But at nighttime it's a little lighter. So they changed the mixture of the concoction that they were lighting on fire up, which obviously
to be able to contrast with the night sky.
So you could actually see it better at night.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Because they shot that at sunset mostly, and then obviously the fire itself was lighting up the sequence.
Fire.
I'm Cornholio.
I am Cornholio.
Fire.
And I understand. So No Country for Old Men ended up cleaning up more at the Oscars, and it did win Best Picture and Best Director for the Coen brothers. I understand why. And it was a tough year. I was rooting for There Will Be Blood, but I was like, No Country's amazing. So when it won, I was like, I wasn't even mad or disappointed. I was just like, I mean, makes sense. So I think that the Academy, it's not like they made a decision. It's you're choosing between two impossible choices. And also, Juno actually won Best Original Screenplay, well deserved by Diablo Cody. So that was a great year for film. Terrific movies. I understand why There Will Be Blood won. Beat for beat, it is a sensational film. It is, in my opinion, the Coen brothers' best work. A couple of the greatest performances of the century with Tommy Lee Jones and obviously Javier Bardem, who won. I think Tommy Lee should have been nominated for Best Lead Actor if he wasn't. I'm not sure if he was. And obviously, I think Robert Elswit absolutely deserved the Best Cinematography Oscar. Daniel Day-Lewis for sure. However, I will say, I do think that looking back on both films, having watched them both a lot, both about 20 watches each, I would say I think Paul Thomas Anderson deserved the Oscar for Best Director over the Coen brothers. And the Coen brothers, I think they could have won Best Director for a couple of their other movies. And I just think that No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood, if they came out in any other year, they would have absolutely cleaned up for sure.
Yeah, if they were a year apart, absolutely. You know, when I think about which film is better, it kind of goes back and forth for me. Right now, I'd probably say that There Will Be Blood is better, but maybe the next time I watch No Country, I'll be like, oh, that's better.
Yeah, you did just watch it yesterday.
The thing I think No Country won Best Picture over There Will Be Blood because it's a much more digestible film for the average audience member, especially for the average Academy voter watching these movies. Not everyone loves There Will Be Blood. They find it slow and boring, whereas No Country, it's more fast-paced. It has very slow moments and patient moments. I wouldn't even say slow, patient moments.
Yeah.
But it has actions. It's fast-paced.
It's good versus evil.
Yeah, we have guns and we're shooting stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
easy themes to digest.
Yeah, so I think that's probably why it won, because for the average audience member, No Country is a lot more digestible as a viewing experience.
I totally agree. I think that's a good point because it is a more traditional plot and a more traditional film, whereas There Will Be Blood doesn't really have a plot, and it's more of just a character study. I like to compare There Will Be Blood, I would say, is a contemporary Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane doesn't have a plot. It's about a person who builds an empire, self-destructs, and destroys himself, and then dies at the end.
Rosebud.
Obviously, we don't see Daniel Plainview die in this film, but he does go through the rise, self-destruction, and it is about an incredibly powerful figure in a titan in an industry. So, and plus, on top of that, the remarkable filmmaking. That's why I like to compare both films.
I think that a lot of audience members also, they need a good guy and a bad guy.
Good versus evil.
They need a good guy, bad guy. There Will Be Blood just has a guy who's good for a little bit and very evil, we find out.
Not to say that it was extremely well received for critics. So when comparing over 40 top 10 lists of the decade from various notable publications, There Will Be Blood actually came out on top with the most mentions, appearing on 46% of critics' lists and being ranked the decade's best film on 5 of them. And then Peter Travers of Rolling Stone chose it as the number 1 film of the decade. He is one of the most famous movie critics of all time. He said that, and then the Gawker website put all these together and found that There Will Be Blood is film critics' consensus of the best film of the decade when aggregating all of the best decades lists, stating, when the votes were all in, by a nose, There Will Be Blood stood alone atop of the decade, and its straw of the whole damn cinema's milkshake.
When I think about the best films of the century, this has to be contender for number 1. I mean, it's There Will Be Blood, and then we have probably Social Network, Parasite, Inglourious Bastards, Moonlight. Those are probably, like, just real quick off the top of my head, top 5 films of the century for sure.
It's good top 5.
And obviously you can interchange some of those with other ones. But just really quickly, I would say that those are probably arguably the top 5 of the century. Maybe Blade Runner 2049's in there possibly. But
I'd say Roma's in there.
Roma's for sure.
Yeah.
So like but
Children of Men too. I'd say Quaron has 2 in there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can keep going.
12 hours later. Well, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water.
I mean, Man of Steel, right?
600 movies later.
I mean, there's got to be 4 Chris Nolans in there. But when you're just talking about the real masterpieces, because we always talk about how the word masterpiece is used way too loosely, especially on film Twitter, film talk, and film podcasts. We very seldom use that word, really. The word masterpiece is really a special word. Words matter. This is a masterpiece, one of the few of the century. There's maybe 15 this whole century, maybe 20.
I agree.
We don't even always get one every year.
Yeah. And, I mean, is there a movie like There Will Be Blood?
Well, you could argue aesthetically, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is similar to There Will Be Blood because that was inspiration for the look of the film.
In the century. Well, it's a very different story, though.
No, that's
extremely
why
different
I said
story.
The aesthetic.
Yeah. I'm saying, is there a movie like There Will Be Blood? Anything like it?
Not that I can think of.
It's so wholly unique.
Why did I sing that?
The only film that I can think of that even compares to it in terms, I'm not saying in quality, but in terms of what it is, what story it's telling, how it's made. The only film I can think of is Citizen Kane. That was almost 100 years ago. That's how unique this movie is. There's really nothing like it. And for me, that makes this film really special, especially this century.
Arguably, you could say The Wolf of Wall Street is similar, just much louder, vulgar, and has a lot more dialogue.
No way, man.
No, but I mean similar in terms of the story.
Completely different tone.
The arc of the characters kind of similar.
Totally different tone.
I know, but I'm just saying, kind of. I'm thinking of movies where someone builds an empire and then he actually doesn't lose it.
Yeah, he doesn't lose it.
I'm just thinking of empire building movies.
Yeah.
For a single,
I know what you're saying.
A character study of someone building an empire.
Okay, you can have a conversation about it. I agree.
There's a conversation to be had.
Yeah. But I'm saying in terms of like the filmmaking, in terms of the tone, in terms of the character.
The only thing I can think of is other Paul Thomas Anderson movies.
Not even that. Just Citizen Kane. That's it. There's like those 2 movies are like their own kind of thing, and I've never seen anything like them. And I just watched Citizen Kane a month ago, and then watching There Will Be Blood again, and I've thought this for years. And then again, last night I was like, this is like the new Citizen Kane of this century in a way. And this is a movie that I'm sure is being taught in film schools right now.
I hope it is.
And in 100 years, they will still be teaching in film schools There Will Be Blood, how Paul Thomas Anderson directed this movie, how Daniel Day-Lewis acted in this movie, how Robert Elswit shot it, and Johnny Greenwood scored. There's just so many aspects to the film that deserve to be celebrated and also dissected in so many incredible ways. And to this day, it still holds up. And I gotta say, I mean, it's especially in terms of themes. You had a good point about how No Country, much more digestible themes, good versus evil. You know, good guy, bad guy. In this film, it's bad guy, bad guy. You know what I mean?
He's good at first.
But the themes are actually more complex and actually, in a lot of ways, more relatable to our world. I mean, greed, capitalism, religion. Family, blood, family. And so this movie is about themes that resonate to everybody and still resonate relevantly in our world today.
It's about family.
It's about family. The Fast X knows how important There Will Be Blood is.
There will be family.
But in a way, it is a great depiction of capitalism. And, there's this statistic that I believe most CEOs of corporate 500s are sociopaths. And because in order to rise to the top of a position like that, you have to be cutthroat. You have to not care about anybody else except for yourself. You have to lack empathy. And you have to be like a self-possessed human being and care only about your own rise and your own benefits. And that, I think, makes up the majority of people who are CEOs of major corporations. And Daniel Day-Lewis is a perfect depiction of that. Someone who is so self-possessed, someone who will do anything to get ahead, someone who lies to get deals made. He's a swindler. I mean, just look at the quail hunting. How many times have they gone quail hunting? How many times have Daniel Plainview and his son HW gone quail hunting on a property that they know possibly has oil underneath it, only to swindle the landowners into signing a contract to buy the property without revealing that they are knowledgeable about oil on this land and are actual professional oil people? And so how many times can you imagine they've done this kind of like charade and performance of saying we're hunting for quail like they do on the Sunday farm? It's an example of Daniel Plainview being a swindler and doing anything he can to get ahead and also to save a buck.
That scene in that sequence, it's so important because now let's just talk about Daniel Plainview, and obviously we'll talk about Daniel Day-Lewis along with the character. Now, this is such a great moment because obviously whenever you think of There Will Be Blood, you think of Daniel Plainview, you think of this horrible character, this murderer, this villainous guy, this greedy, ambitious person who'll do anything to obtain his obsession with obtaining all the riches in the world to get away from all the people he hates. That's all you think about. But then when you go back and watch the movie, he's a very likable and empathetic character for about 45 minutes. It's not until that scene where we start to see the bad side of Daniel Plainview. That opening sequence is brilliant. It's 10, 11 minutes with no dialogue, and we see Daniel Plainview suffering. He's probably been doing this for years, digging these holes by himself, running around in the dirt, creating holes, trying to find gold, trying to find silver.
Not just holes, he's digging pits through stone.
Suffering daily, and then breaks his leg, and he finds his silver. He makes mistakes. He almost dies. He has to drag himself with a broken leg across the desert, who knows how many miles, to get his silver and get cash, then build up his operation even more. And when you watch this character, what he goes through in the first 10 minutes, in the first 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you don't feel like he's a bad guy. You actually have a lot of respect for him because of what he's building. He's putting the work in. He's suffering for his success.
You could say he earned it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He goes through hell to get his success. And it's not until his operation's bigger and we cut to later on, was it 1907 or something like that?
No, 1911. 1907 is when he's still digging.
Okay, 1911, yeah. 1911, where we're cutting and he's talking to the townspeople. We're hearing his great speech.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's 1912 when he's talking, the dialogue. Whatever it is.
Either way, well, because 1911 is when he meets Paul Sunday.
Yeah.
So I believe that's around the same time.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's 1911. He's talking to the townsfolk about their running oil. And this is the first time we're really getting to hear him actually speak to the audience, speak to us, speak to the camera. And he's a great public speaker. And we don't realize he's conning people or trying to con them out of their land. It's not until the Sunday Ranch, after he gets the information from Paul Sunday to go there, where he says, where HW asks, like, how much will we charge them? What price will we give them? He's like, well, we won't give them oil prices. We'll give them quail prices. And then we're like, oh, he's an asshole. He's a
swindler,
an evil guy. He's a con man. He's swindling people. And then slowly and steadily, things happen. We see who Daniel truly is. But up until that point, he's actually a very likable, empathetic character.
And you can see how he comes across, especially on early meetings with people, how he looks like he could be the savior of a town. So Little Boston, once he buys up every lot of land that he can, except for the Bandy Tract, he has that public meeting with all the townsfolk. And he gives another speech, and he tells them, we're going to build a school, we're going to build fields of grain, we're going to irrigate your farms, we're going to do all this amazing stuff, and we're going to make Little Boston flourish. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He doesn't build a farm. There's no wheat farm.
Doesn't build any roads.
He doesn't build roads. He doesn't build a school. He swindles everybody. He's like it's a song and dance to get people on his side. We're going to do all this amazing stuff for you to get them to be like, okay, this oil thing might be a good thing for us. Obviously, they got paid. I'm sure he gave them very tiny leasing contracts and then decent payments after word got out about the oil. I'm sure he couldn't do the quail prices with everybody, but you bet your ass he got good deals on all that land.
The Sundays are still living in their ranch.
Exactly. And then, I mean, in Eli and his son Abel and his father Abel, they have that great fight where Eli calls him an idiot and
stupid man, Abel.
But Abel says, I trusted him by his word. And then people don't realize someone like Daniel Plainview, he will lie right to your face to get what he wants. And what he wants is your property, because what he wants is your oil that you actually rightfully deserve, but he's going to take it from you. He takes it from everybody. And that's what's so brilliant about the character, because he is extremely personable. He's extremely well-spoken. He has a cute son, a cute face to throw in front of people. An excellent example of how he uses HW, as well as the great camera move we mentioned, is after that very confusing scene where he gives that opening monologue and then the room erupts and it's just chaos, and then Daniel and HW walk out. He's like, I wouldn't take the lease if you gave it to me as a gift. So he doesn't want to deal with confusion. He wants control. He's a very controlling person. He's not going to get control of these people, so he's out. It's not a situation he wants to be in. And so after that, we see him talking to a nearby couple who I'm sure own many acres of land near that gusher. And he's talking to them in their dining room. And what he's doing is he's trying to sell them. He's saying, we can have we can have a derrick up in 10 days. We can start drilling in 10 days. That's something no one else can give you. And then he offers $1,000 for their property plus a 6% of the leasing contract for the land. And then the husband...
1/6.
Sorry, 1/6. Big difference. And so the husband, he's thinking it over. And again, PTA does not cut to them. He holds it on Daniel Day-Lewis. And he holds the shot of Daniel Plainview staring at the husband for a good 5 seconds. And then what happens? Do you know what happens?
HW.
No.
The children.
No. Exactly. Okay. So then when Daniel Plainview realizes he's not getting through to the husband, his eyes look to the wife sitting next to the husband. And then he goes, What age your children, ma'am? So he's making the connection of children. We're both families. I'm a father to a son who I have sitting here. You're parents to your children. I am a family man. This is a family business. This is his backup plan. HW, he's trying to make an emotional connection, parent to parent, to these people because businessman to landowner didn't work. So he makes a new approach, and that's family person to family person. And that's his ulterior approach to business deals. And that's his backup plan. That's an example of him changing his approach to the business deal. Let's connect with them on a familial level.
Some of the most fascinating characters, in film, especially villains, are ones we hardly know anything about their past. I mean, think about this century. The Joker from The Dark Knight, Anton Chigurh, and Daniel Plainview. Probably the most loved villains of the century, right? Those three. We know nothing about their past. We don't know what Anton Chigurh, who he was or what he was before that opening scene. We just know that he's as bad as, compared to what? The bubonic plague?
The bubonic plague.
The Joker, we know nothing about his past. He's got fake identities, makes his own clothing, makes his own weaponry, completely off the books.
Nothing in his pockets but knives and lint.
It's like reference, bro. Everyone knows your references are out of control. Everybody knows it. Daniel Plainview, we hardly know anything about his past. The most we learn about is the name of his hometown. We learn about the Peachtree Dance a little bit. We know that he has a sister. Besides that, we know also that he worked on he worked on the geological survey, and then he moved from Kansas City, wherever he was doing that, to find his wealth in the desert.
And he must have learned the skills, he must have acquired skills doing that to be able to find something like silver.
And we know nothing about his past, really. And I think it's Henry who asks him about his past. He says, I don't want to talk about those things. Doesn't want to talk about anything because... And that's what I think is so interesting about so many of these characters. And what makes me I can't stand so many movies today where we have to know everything about everyone's past. So much exposition, but the mystery makes a character so much more alluring to an audience member.
Gotta do a sob story about what happened to me when I was 18.
I don't care what created Daniel Day-Lewis into what he is. I mean, Daniel Plainview into who he is. All I care about is his actions in the story. I don't care if he had a tough past, if he had an abusive father. If he did, that's terrible, but it doesn't matter to the story. What we have is a fully formed character, and that's what I love about it. We don't have to know everything, and the mystery is part of the prize with these characters.
I like that part of the prize. and as self-destructive and as cruel and brutal and violent as Daniel can be, he actually has a deep devotion and desire for connection to family. Hence the blood in the title. I don't think There Will Be Blood totally refers to just actual blood.
I concur.
And so Daniel
is in terms of murder.
Yeah. Daniel is desperate for connection. He feels isolated from everybody around him. He says, that great quote with Henry.
I got it right here. Oh, you got it?
I got it right here.
Wow, it's like we have the same ideas. It's like we're twins.
I see the worst in people. I don't need to look past seeing them to get all I need. I've built my hatreds up over the years, little by little. I can't keep doing this on my own with these people.
So he hates people. He hates ordinary people. But he's desperate for connection, most notably familial connection. Hence, his adoption of this orphan boy, which he turns into his son. He makes a familial connection with him. And then when Henry shows up, someone who he believes to be a brother he didn't know about, he takes Henry in with open arms. He makes Fletcher jealous about putting him in the business deals. Henry has no experience with anything like this, and then he's in the Standard Oil deal, like in the room with them. He embraces Henry because he's so desperate for that family. And then when he learns of Henry's real truth of being someone who is posing as his real brother, Daniel kills him out of rage, out of anger, and then he weeps while reading his real brother's diary. He weeps all night. He's desperate for connection, but he wants that connection from blood. He wants the connection from family. I would say he believes that's the only true connection a human being can have is to their own kin and to their own blood. That's why he abandons his son when things get difficult, and that's why when his son decides to do his own thing, he rejects him and reveals his true background as an orphan, as a way to hurt him and as a way to push him away, because HW is not of his blood, so he's not important to me. I can't actually have a real human bond and connection with this person because they aren't of the same line as me. And so deep human connection is something he craves more than anything, but he has this odd rule of it having to be with family.
I mean, although I think he had that with HW for a time, and I think he did love HW until his accident at the explosion of the oil geyser, of the oil derrick, when he lost his hearing, and I'll get into that in a minute, but I want to go back to the speech with Henry real quick. I want to open up the speech with the opening lines where he says, "I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people." And then blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
You said a few lines, and then, "I've built my hatreds up over the years, little by little. Henry, to have you here gives me a second breath. I can't keep doing this on my own with these people."
That's what I missed.
Such an important speech, because this is the moment. This speech is the moment that we really understand who Daniel is. Terrible things have happened in this town. We've seen him take advantage of these people and their land. We've also seen a man die on the oil derrick. But the way he acts about it, it's not like a villainous thing. There's an action. This is life. I mean, if you're growing up before 1950, you had a high probability of death before the age of 30, especially if you're working railroads, working oil rigs. Like, dangerous. A lot of people died. Yeah. These are dangerous things to do, building roads. So it's just it's not like he did it on purpose. It's just he couldn't control the situation. He does tell the men that work there, like, we got to do better. You got to, if someone goes down in the basement, let someone else know. Tell somebody. So he handles it in a way that you expect. But it's not until this speech that we truly see what goes on inside Daniel Plainview's mind, how he hates most people. He sees nothing in common with them. He has such a competition inside of him. He doesn't want anyone else to succeed but him. And then his dealings with Standard Oil, where he tells the Standard Oil representative that he's going to cut his Tilford. He tells him, "One night I'm going to come into your room and sneak into your house while you're sleeping and cut your throat," because he tells him in a way how to run his family, but Daniel obviously overreacts to the point where
it's a mild overreaction.
It's quite the overreaction.
Just tell me how to raise my family.
It's these things that really show us who Daniel Plainview is, but this speech with Henry, I think, is the real cursor of what's going on inside Daniel Plainview's mind.
And it's the only time that I'm sure Daniel has ever opened up in front of anybody, and he did it within several hours, just a few hours of meeting Henry, because Henry, he assumed, was his brother. He told him the most deepest emotions and feelings he has as a human being. I guarantee Daniel Plainview has never told anything like this to anybody, but he told it to this person because he thought he was his brother. The connection, the familial bond, is something he craves and desires. And I totally agree. I think that he did absolutely love HW. We could talk about...
Actually, can we stay on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Because I want to talk about why their relationship changes so much and why Daniel and HW takes a while parting ways and end up hating each other in a lot of ways. So, was HW just a front for buying land? Did Daniel Plainview actually care about the boy? I think it's very obvious that Daniel cared very much for HW, even though he wasn't blood. He loved that boy. He was so worried about him when he got hurt, cuddling him after the injury. Obviously, he's watching the oil for like 10 hours straight.
But still,
he cared very much about HW. He always did, and he always looked after his son. He's always teasing him, but he showed a lot of affection, was always kissing him. And there are a couple of moments, you brought up the one time where he has a breakdown where he weeps after he kills Henry, and then he finds his real dead brother, who he never met, didn't know existed, diary, and Daniel weeps. However, he does shed a tear before that when he puts HW on that train and he abandons him on that train and Fletcher comes and takes over. He leaves the train. Daniel sheds a tear. You might not notice it the first time you watch this movie, but Daniel does shed a tear.
He's trying not to. He's holding back the tears.
And he obviously can't look at the train because he would just break down. He'd probably run after the train if he looked back at the train. He actually, I think, in my opinion, cared very much for HW. Now, the deafness that overtakes HW...
Hold on, can I just get, before we move on, the thing is, he adopted HW for business. You know, it's a cute, like he says, you're a cute, nothing more than a cute face to sell the business. He adopted HW for business, but he became his father, and HW his son. They were bonded, and Daniel Plainview loved him. The thing is, like I said, he wanted family so bad, he decided to make his own family. I don't have a familial bond. He did have a sister named Annabelle back home, but he's never going back home. We don't need to know why, but he said going back home and looking at especially that house that he liked would make him sick. I guarantee the last thing he would ever do on earth is go back to his hometown in Fond du Lac. And so, since he has no family outside of Fond du Lac, he's making his own family. HW, he's creating his own familial bond. And I completely agree. He absolutely, wholeheartedly loved HW as a father loves a son.
Question, though. So, this is the first act of the film. When HW's father dies, it's no one's fault. It's just a terrible accident when the oil derrick, the makeshift oil derrick that they're using with the buckets, breaks. That giant piece of wood falls down. 50-50 shot. It could kill Daniel.
Yeah.
Kills HW's father. And then the next sequence is he sees the baby on the train together, actually doting on him. Seems like he's falling in love with the boy.
Before that, we have the HW baby crying in his basket, and then
being baptized.
Plainview doesn't know how to comfort him, and so he gives him whiskey and milk.
But also, he gets baptized with the oil by his father, which is such a great shot. I love that.
It's great.
The what's it called? Palm Sunday. The cross.
No, he just does.
No, I know, but I mean, it's like it's
similar
a reference to the Palm Sunday.
Yeah. I was like, it's not fucking April in this movie.
Where it's ashes.
Ash
Sunday. Ash Sunday.
Ash Sunday. Palm Monday.
Palm
Tuesdays.
It's been a while since Catholic
Stir
school.
Fridays. You know, the Catholic Church is a lot of days.
Good Burger Thursdays.
Stir Fridays is my favorite.
Now, do you think when he saw that baby crying after his father's death, and then on that train after he decides to adopt him, do you think that it was his immediate plan, I'm going to take this baby and try to buy land with him? Or did he just take it out of the goodness of his heart? Because Daniel Plainview, you could argue, maybe he did have a heart back then. And he does have a heart, and that's HW and his strong connection to family. Did he adopt HW, this baby, because he wanted a son so badly, but he didn't have a wife or anything?
I think 100%. That Daniel Plainview, there's this beautiful shot of after the father dies, and then it cuts to the baby sitting in the basket, little HW sitting in the basket, and then it cuts to, at first it starts with Daniel Plainview covered in oil, he's staring cut to the baby. I think in that moment, Daniel Plainview's thinking of what can I do with this child? His father's dead, what do we do with him? And then I think in that moment he came up with the idea of, I can adopt this child, raise him as my own, and I can use him as a selling point for my business to landowners. I think his only intention for adopting HW was for business, but then he grew to love the child like his own son.
Yeah, I think both can be true. I think both are true at the same time.
Well, what's your truth? What do you think?
You know, when he does stare at the baby, it does seem like his brain's working of like, what can I use you for?
That's what I'm saying.
I look at you.
Yeah.
I look at you, Bill. What can I use you for?
And like I said, it's not his own blood.
Departed.
Yeah, it's Jack. Yeah, this baby's not of his own blood, so he's just another body. You know what I mean? It's just another person, and so it's not. I don't think that Plainview ever doesn't make a connection immediately with the child, but the baby playing with his mustache on the train and making Plainview smile and smirk. That's an indication that a bond is going to form, and then a relationship will form. And then by the time we cut to the next scene of the monologue in front of the townsfolk, not the little Boston townsfolk, the other town, HW is standing by Daniel's side, and you feel this is father and son. And he holds his hand a lot, you know what I mean? And the thing is, he doesn't send HW away because he doesn't love him, and he doesn't send HW away because he's not his son. He sends HW away because Daniel Plainview doesn't understand. He can't be a real father. He's not a true father. He doesn't know how to take care of another human being in a real nurturing way. He does not understand nurturing and comfort.
He puts vodka and milk.
His way of making his child calm down is to get him drunk.
Get him liquored up. Take him to the Peachtree dance.
Exactly. And so once HW got to a certain age, self-sufficient, pretty easy. Don't really have to take care of the kid. Just keep him by your side. Teach him everything you know. Help buy leases of land. That's basically their relationship. And then once HW loses his hearing, it becomes very difficult to be a father to him.
And I have an explanation as to why it's tough for Daniel to become a father or continue being a father to HW once he becomes death. But how about we head to our intermission?
Oh, yeah, I'm so curious. Let's do it.
I got a great point, but let's go to the intermission. We'll do our questions. We're also going to bring the superlatives back, and we're going to do superlatives in the intermission as well.
Superlatives are
But
back.
when we get back, I'll reveal why Daniel Plainview has such a terrible and tough time being a father to HW after he becomes deaf.
I'll give you my opinion too.
I'm going first. But
I brought up the topic.
Well, no, I brought up the topic.
I did.
I brought up There Will Be Blood.
Shut up. Just start the ad.
Anyways, but before we continue, the best way to support Raiders of the Lost podcast, you all know, is to become a patron at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast. It's the best way to help us do this full time. We have 5 different tiers of membership. $2, $5, $10, $25, and $100 tiers. Every single patron, no matter what tier you're in, has access to a weekly bonus episode of the show and the weekly chat, which is exclusively on Patreon only. So you get 2 extra episodes every single week if you are a Patreon member. Every tier has awesome perks like free merch. Our $10 tier gets you access to our Discord. It's actually called the I Drink Your Milkshake tier, where you get to communicate with us on Discord. We have our watch parties on there. It's a lot of fun. We built an incredible community. $25 tier gets you your own custom episode. You pick a topic, and we'll do that for you, whatever it is. The $100 tier Chosen One package is the ultimate Patreon membership package. You get all sorts of tier gifts and goodies, plus free merch, as well as a private watch party. You also, after 3 months in this tier, get to come on the show for a fun guest segment. We'll bring you in for the intermission, and we'll chat about the film afterwards, as well as so many other cool perks. Patreon is the only reason that we can do this show full-time. We have it's like 250 members about now. We're pretty close to 250.
243 today.
We got to get to 250. Come on, everybody. Help us get
$2
to
a day. It's less than a cup of coffee.
It helps you to get us Trader Joe's. So
I might start switching to Whole Foods now.
Oh.
I'll tell you why later.
You get back on my train. So thank you so much to all of our patrons out there. Go to patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast to join today.
And this episode, of course, is sponsored by our amazing friends at movieposters.com, the #1 place to get your posters online today. Use our promo code Raiders10 to get 10% off your order today. Movieposters.com is doing a free movie poster giveaway for you. All you got to do to enter this contest for a free movie poster of your choosing is to make a comment in this YouTube video. Comment anything in the There Will Be Blood episode, and it'll enter you into the contest to win a free movie poster from movieposters.com. Again, make a comment in the YouTube episode of our There Will Be Blood episode. That'll enter you in. We will pick a winner in 1 week's time. Good luck, everybody. And for those of you who are looking for more posters, be sure to head over to movieposters.com and use our promo code Raiders10 to get 10% off your order today.
All right, let's head into our intermission and begin with the movie quote competition. We'll also do superlatives, which we have not done in a
superlatives.
Superlatives.
You're saying like superlatives.
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 Well, the English language is messed up, and if you actually pronounce it, it'd be superlatives.
So how's it spelled? Superlatives?
Superlatives.
So I thought it was superlatives. Superlatives.
Anyways.
You just say it like superlatives.
Anyways, let's begin with the movie quote competition before I punch Anthony in the face. You ready?
Yep.
That's right. I've killed women and children. I've killed just about everything that walks or crawled at one time or another. And I'm here to kill you, Little Bill, for what you did to Ned.
That's Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven.
It's a pretty messed up quote.
It is. Well, he's a bad guy.
He's on a path
He's
of
not a
redemption.
hero.
He's on a path of revenge.
Yeah.
and redemption.
All right, here's my quote. Great pick, though. It's a great.
Love
movie.
that movie.
Yeah, we should watch it soon.
So good.
We should do The Good and the Bad and the Ugly soon.
Trilogy.
No, just that film.
Just that movie.
There's so much. I mean, it's a fucking 3.5-hour movie. There's enough to talk about.
Yeah, Fistful of Dollars
Yeah.
is like 3 hours long
Yeah.
too.
Okay, here's my quote.
I did what your brother couldn't. I broke you.
Oh my god, I made a quote from this movie.
Wait, what?
I did a quote from There Will Be Blood.
No, you didn't say it.
I did it.
Say it. Say it out loud.
Oh no, I didn't. Hold on, that was just my favorite line from the movie. I got it. So I was just reading it wrong. I'm a glass of wine in, a heavy glass of wine in.
Oh yeah.
That was just my favorite line from There Will Be Blood. There's nothing to do with my
Okay,
quote.
yeah.
Okay.
Get to your
Okay.
movie quote, Anthony.
Here's my quote.
Is this one of your superlatives?
This is a quote. Here's the thing. I don't give a tippany fuck about your moral conundrum, you meat-headed shit stack. That's more or less one thing. And I want you to go out there. You, nobody else. None of your little minions. I want you to go out there and I want you to punish the person who's responsible for murdering this poor rabbit. Is that understood?
Is that Gangs of New York?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Bill the Butcher. He like starts weeping about the rabbit. It's so funny.
All right.
Oh man.
Get such a good movie.
I know, I love
Guess
that.
this movie release year. The Outlaw, Josie Wales. We're busting out the trailer voices today.
Going Eastwood today.
Clint Eastwood.
Well, you're going Eastwood today.
Yeah, how are you feeling, lucky bug?
It's a great trivia.
A great trivia guy.
You just repeating what I'm saying? What the fuck? I won't cover up with your own words, man.
Oh, coming up with your own words, man.
Outlaw Josie Wales 73.
1976. Do you feel lucky? Nah.
Punk. Guess this movie release year. In the Name of the Father.
Is this 90s or 80s? I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go 80s. Doesn't feel right though. But I'm gonna say 1988,
93.
93. It looks in my head. It looks like a 90s movie.
Well, I believe My Beautiful Laundrette came out in 88.
Yeah.
Which was Daniel's big breakout role.
Yeah, but film changed so much every decade that like it just yeah.
Yeah. It's fun. Okay, bonus point. The actor who played his father
Oh,
was in a Ben Affleck movie. What Ben Affleck movie?
The Town.
Pete Postlethwaite.
Yeah, The Town. He's the flower shop
Yep.
guy. He's the big man,
Yep.
the gangster. All right, movie pop
Wow,
quiz time.
you know movie stuff.
I know a few things. How many Oscars does Clint Eastwood have in bonus points if you can name the movies he's won for?
How many does Clint have? Okay, he never won for acting. I'm guessing he has 2 directing wins. Does he have a screenplay win? I'm gonna go with 2 Oscars. And he won Best Director for $1 Million Baby Unforgiven.
So you got the best directors right. So he won 2 for those awards. So he won Best Director for both Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. However, he also has Oscars for winning Best Pictures for $1 Million Baby
producer.
and Unforgiven.
I didn't even think of that.
So Clint Eastwood has 4 Oscars as well as an honorary award as well.
Great trivia question. Man, you got me.
Got you, man. Got him.
Okay, who directed Daniel Day-Lewis in Last of the Mohicans?
This is like a total shot in the dark, but you wouldn't happen to be pre-med. Peter Ware.
It's a good guess, but it's not. It's not Peter Weir. I'll give you one more guess.
Rob Reiner.
Michael Mann.
Ah, Michael Mann.
Michael Mann.
God damn it, man.
Great director, man. Love that guy.
Legend.
Can't
Can't wait for Heat 2, honestly.
The thing
I
with
don't even care.
the thing with Day-Lewis is like when he's in a role, it just feels like a real person, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then as there's a story of when he was prepping for Last of the Mohicans, he was so in character that they had a break for a Christmas vacation because they were shooting during December and January. And so we went home in costume and even brought a rifle to the dinner table for Christmas with his family.
That's what he does. That's what he does. No, but like the thing with his method acting is people think that he doesn't know what's going on around the world. He doesn't know that smartphones or cell phones exist or technology. He knows all that exists. He's just in character.
Yeah.
So like he knows he's on a movie set. He knows he has a wife and kids.
He's just always play acting.
He's just in character.
And I mean,
like he wouldn't use the gun.
did you see like there's been a couple actors that call BS on it, call it pretentious. Like there's a couple.
Brian Cox has been coming out lately because
Well, he's been making fun of the guy who plays Kendall.
Yeah.
But
Well, he makes fun of method acting in general.
Thing is, like, I mean,
Everyone's got
it's the
their
guy's
own,
process.
Everyone's
It's
got
his
their own
process,
technique.
and
He's the greatest
it's
of all
not like
time.
he brags about it. It's not like he's Jared Leto and affecting anybody. You know what I mean? By sending them weird shit in the mail. You know, he's not doing anything like that. I think, it's his process, and for him, I saw this great interview where he said he's like a kid where he just never gave up imagination and imagining things and play acting. And then he just held on to it. When he said most adults, when they grow up, they just throw that out the door and they move on with their lives. But I just never let go of that, and so he just pretends,
There's one Daniel Day-Lewis. That's the reason why.
Yeah,
There's no one like it. There's no one like him. There's no one who creates characters like him. He's just the ultimate chameleon. Creates a different human being and is a different person.
Not even Christian Bale's method.
I mean, very few.
When
actors,
not even Heath Ledger's method. When they're offset, they're just themselves.
Yeah, very few actors are. But I mean, there's a reason why he's as good as he is.
He's the best. I think he's the best ever.
I think this is the best performance ever. But let's get into our. We got haters or
we got some unsubscribes.
Yeah, what we got? What we got?
Oh yeah, we got. I made a list.
He's just fawning over Daniel Day over there.
It's like I got to turn the intermission back
He's
into
just
the
like
episode.
thinking about it, close-ups of his face.
He's got a great face.
Perfect facial hair.
Speaking of, so Robert Elswit said, it was difficult lighting him because he wore a hat in a lot of the movie. And he said, with Daniel Day-Lewis, all you really have to do is just put the camera on and then he does everything for you because his face is so photogenic and then he does so much with his face. But he said he had a lot of difficulty lighting Daniel Day-Lewis because of the hats he wore.
Yeah, so actually the way they got around that is they stuck to mostly practical and ambient lighting because obviously studio lights, it's going to create harsh shadows under the rim of the hat, but atmospheric or like the average, if you're outside,
it bounces.
It's just a less harsh light or shadow.
Yeah.
So that's how they got around that. But also, I mean, I love just that the hat is a great attention to detail, not to just get back into the movie real quick, but the hat, since we're talking about it, if you notice it, the details of it, he's probably been wearing it for months, probably years, because he spent like 3 years preparing for this. Sweat stains all over that thing.
Oh, yeah.
And he wears the same hat the whole movie, no matter how wealthy
Except
he becomes.
for the early film. When he's on the train with Baby HW, it's a different hat.
Different hat, but
it's
when
a
he gets
bowler hat.
Okay, yeah, but when he gets a little more wealth and the company going, like when we get the townsfolk, he's wearing that same hat the whole movie, up until the third act, really, in his future. But it's got so many sweat stains on it because I guarantee Daniel Day-Lewis wore that every day, probably for 2 years.
He walked on set with it.
Probably. He probably wore it around the house every day.
Oh, for sure. I love the hat.
But let's get back into
Unsubscribes.
Robert Elswit unsubscribed from Paul Thomas Anderson.
He did. I can get into that drama, actually, if you want.
Yeah, after this.
I read up about it a couple
We
years
got to
ago.
talk about HW, then talk about that.
Yeah. So Angelo Vantera wrote, Legally Blonde Origins, Amazon, unsubscribed.
Same, Angela.
So I wrote, just stop, Amazon.
They're wasting so much money.
Yeah.
Even the what was the remake, the baseball show of the Tom Hanks, Gina Davis.
Oh,
Why are we blanking on this?
oh my God. I'm sorry. I can't think of it.
Well, that show, it's like a $90 million budget.
Really?
And I heard that the ratings were terrible on that show.
Damn.
League of Their Own.
League of Their Own, yeah. Damn.
And they're making an like.
Well, I mean, did you see the trailer?
Yeah, I saw it, but like they're just burning money, man.
It'll look good. All right. Anyways,
Not to bash on that show, but like I haven't seen it, but
the trailer looks pretty bad.
they put $90 million into that show.
Anyways, back to unsubscribes. Case Brindis wrote, it's Glenn Powell in the new Twister, not Glenn Howerton. Unsubscribe.
I thought I said Powell.
I think we said Howerton both
think you
times.
said Howerton.
I definitely said Howerton.
I definitely said Powell.
Probably.
Anthony likes to mix names up
Really?
all the time.
Calling me out, man.
Calling him out.
Throwing me under the bus.
Always.
The only mistakes ever made are by me.
But I never said that. You said it, but sure. No, I've made a few here and there.
John Hiller wrote, got through your top 10s of all time and no fucking Paddington 2? Unsubscribed. I wrote not enough marmalade. 2 out of 10. Also, no Marvel. What kind of Marvel nerd-centric podcasters are you? Christ. I said, I know, right? 90% of our podcast is Marvel nerd shit. So that's a reference to a hater from last week.
I don't even think we didn't even put Marvel movies in our top 100. I don't think
We put just Dark Knight.
We did 100
Dark
greatest
Knight.
of all time. I think 100 favorites.
I think I put Spider-Man 2, Infinity War in my top 100.
Yeah, but Spider-Man 2 is not a Marvel Studios movie.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Even
True.
though it's kind of
True.
canon now.
Yeah. Jazzy Jeff 27 wrote, release the AI podcast or I'll be unsubscribed.
That last one got a lot of mixed reactions.
It was good. Alexander Vickery, wow, gatekeeping a classic song to the MCU, unsubscribed. Robert John Leet wrote, every time I'm mentioned on the podcast, just start randomly yelling, evil dies tonight.
Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight.
I'm glad you guys can say my name right. High school sucked because they would come up with dumb names for me. For that reason, I will never unsubscribe. I hope I just said your name right just now.
How did you say it?
I don't know.
No, how did you say it?
Leet.
How's it spelled?
Leite.
Leite. Yeah. Sounds close.
Leet.
He's probably like, no, I'm definitely unsubscribed.
Shane Thomas Martin wrote, your top 10 wasn't the same as mine? Unsubscribed. And then we got a ton of hate. I made a Star Wars Instagram reel talking about Daisy Ridley getting her own movie.
You can't say anything nice about Daisy Ridley on the internet.
Holy shit!
Holy crap.
One of the worst ones was Mr. Rantington 777 wrote, shut your channel down now and find something else to do.
I think I had to block like 10 people at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to the point where I'm like, I'm not sure if I ever want to talk about the sequel trilogy in a positive light ever, like on social media again, because the hate for it. I mean,
insane.
It's getting to the point where it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I understand if you don't like the movies, but like they're just movies, and not everybody hates them. I don't mind the sequel trilogy. Obviously, they're not perfect, but like I don't hate them. And man, I'm just tired. I'm getting to the point where I'm tired of even bringing the movies up because the firestorm that comes out for any reaction of any kind of positivity about the movies, it's like, get over it. It's just a movie. It's just movies.
Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight.
But I'm tired, man. I'm tired of talking about the sequel trilogy and getting destroyed for it. You know what? I don't think the movies are terrible. Whatever. They're just movies. All these haters get to fucking move on with their lives and grow the hell up and like move on. It's just a fucking movie. I'm tired, man.
Can't say
I'm done.
If you say anything nice about Ray, they come after you.
Holy shit. She's a great actor. And you know what? Give him another chance. You know what I mean? Give her another chance. She didn't make the movie. She didn't write the scripts. She did the best she could. I guarantee you, the movie they make, it could be good, and everyone will be like, oh, I love Ray. I've always liked Ray. What if they make a sick movie? Who cares? If you don't want to see it, don't see it. But don't fucking attack people just because they enjoy parts of the movies.
It's not Ray's fault.
Yeah.
It's not Daisy Ridley's fault.
Exactly. She's a wonderful actress.
It's the writing.
Yeah, she's an extremely talented person, and you know what? You couldn't do what she does, so go fuck yourself.
All right, let's move on to our streaming recommendations. We had no new 5-star reviews, so I don't have a top supporter of the week. Sorry.
That's okay. We gotta get those rookie numbers up.
Yeah, we gotta bump those numbers up. If we get some new 5-star reviews, that'd be great. Write whatever you want.
You can just write James is a bonehead.
Yeah, write James is a bonehead. That's fine. Streaming recommendation. Mine is gonna be Psycho. Just got added to Netflix this month for April.
Nice.
So watch it before, and maybe it leaves soon.
I just watched The Host on HBO Max.
Oh fuck yeah!
Bong Joon-ho's film. It was the first Bong Joon-ho film I ever saw. It was the first South Korean film I ever saw, and I saw that movie. I was like, "What the fuck? This is awesome!" And the CGI doesn't totally hold up to the standards of today, but if you just accept that, it's an incredible monster movie and really one of the best ever.
Want to use superlatives?
What are they?
Superlatives. Stop laughing at me. I'm getting insecure.
Yeah, let's do them, man.
Want to do soups? Sups?
I don't know. That Soups has soups like locked down, so you can't say soups.
Want to do sups?
Sups.
Who's your MVP of the film?
My MVP is Daniel Day-Lewis.
Same.
I mean, like Ellswood said, all you gotta do is photograph him, and he does everything for you. Not to say anything that PTA and Ellsworth and the rest of the crew weren't absolutely phenomenal, but just like Daniel Day-Lewis is one of a kind, and he elevates every project he's on. And when you see him performing, it's as if you're watching a real person alive, just captured on screen.
He is alive.
The character alive. He is a real character alive. Shut up, man.
It's like when you watch him,
I'm trying to eloquently speak my point.
It's like he's a living being.
That is exactly it. It's like this performance is not just a performance, but it's a person. And he actually, like PTA, I've seen plenty of interviews, and he gave a lot of insight with Phantom Thread where he said Daniel Day-Lewis actually does quite a lot of improvisation and comes up with a lot of his own ideas on set. And PTA really lets him run with it in a lot of ways. It's not as controlled as you might think it is. And I'm sure there was a lot of that in this film. And, I mean, all you got to do is just point a camera at the guy and you're going to get something special out of it. And so I don't think anybody else, no other actor could have done what he did in this role and really made it the picture what it is. So I got to say Daniel Day-Lewis is the MVP.
Yeah, I concur. If he was on your sports team, he'd be getting $200 million guaranteed for 5 years.
Yep.
Best scene. Who you got?
I got the finale, the final scene between Daniel and Eli, the entire confrontation leading up to him beating him to death with a bowling pin.
I have the oil geyser when it explodes, then lights on fire. It's probably the longest scene in the movie, and it has so many different moods and tones and emotions and color schemes and cinematography and the music and the explosion, HW's injury, which is a huge impact on the character of Daniel Day-Lewis, plus the beautiful fire lit up at night is incredible. Fire. Plus Daniel watching it for 12 hours straight.
Yeah, legit.
Evening to night. I mean to morning.
It's a great pick.
Best shot.
My favorite shot is when Daniel is in the water looking out at Henry sitting on the beach, and what Ellsworth did was he kept the camera for most of the sequence half underwater, half above water, and it enlarges Daniel Day-Lewis's body. It makes him look like a giant, and I think it's a really beautiful illustration for the character.
You know what I love about that scene?
What?
Is they both are seen jumping into the ocean, but we don't see what from.
Don't need to.
That's what's so fascinating about that scene. Like, there's no boat.
Yeah.
There's no boat shown. They're just like shown jumping in, and it's like, how did that happen?
Doesn't matter.
I fucking love it because it's like, I'm like, where do they jump from?
Because it's awesome, man. It's because it looks cool.
I love PTA, man. Yeah. My favorite shot is actually probably when Daniel and HW arrive in Little Boston for the first time. It's this great tracking shot where the camera is on the train tracks, and they're obviously pushing it along the tracks. And as their car is approaching the train station, they're following along with the car. The car goes behind the train station. The camera keeps tracking along the train track, and then we get the shot of the car coming from behind the train station, and they park, and we stop, and we get a little closer in on them. It's a really incredible shot. I think it's probably the most underrated shot in the movie.
I remember the first time I saw that film, I saw that shot, and I was like mouth agape, like, wow, this is amazing.
Another one,
and also in that, if you look at that shot closely, all the windows of the train station are up because they would have shown the reflection of the crew. So every window is actually halfway up.
There's another incredible one in this as well. I think Daniel is at the train station again, and I think it's when he watches Eli board the train to go on a mission, and then the camera cuts to Daniel. He's just sitting in that seat smoking, and the light changes are so incredible because the train's blocking the sun. He's just lit from the light inside the train station, and it's just some soft lighting from the sun being poured elsewhere, and the train goes by, and then we have the bright red sun shining on his face, and it just seems so real and authentic to
there it is.
If you're in real life, and
check.
The sun just
I agree. I love that shot too. Also, my other favorite shot is actually early in the film during the opening sequence of him when he's mining for silver on his own. And so after that day of mining that we see him do, and he climbs up the ladder, and then we just get this beautiful shot. It's really tremendous of him sitting at his own campsite. He's sitting there, he's squatted down, drinking coffee with a little campfire in his tent beside him, and there's this beautiful landscape behind him. He's got a full beard, winds blowing on him, and there's lightning striking in the storm in the distance behind him. And it's he holds it for like 10 seconds. It's just like an amazing shot. It's so beautiful, and it just really, for me, connects me with that human being of someone who's really just like going through hell every day to try to scrape some kind of success out of the earth. And the length of his beard tells you how long he's been doing it. And when you look at that stone in the opening where he's picking away with the pickaxe, you're like, this entire fucking pit is just stone. He's not digging through dirt. He's digging through fucking stone. It's unbelievable to see how deep that goes and how far, like, how big the cavern he's working in has become. So he's been at this spot for weeks and weeks and weeks digging.
I love that opening with the sparks flying every time he hits the rock and stone. It's incredible. Yeah. Best actor, I mean,
Daniel
Day-Lewis.
Daniel Day.
What's your best line or quote?
So obviously,
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. I drink the blood of lamb from Bandy's tract.
the milkshake line is obviously his most famous, but there's a line in this movie that always cracks me up. And he lies to Eli about Paul. And he says,
Listen. I paid him $10,000 cash in hand, just like that.
So he lies. He embellishes the truth. And in reality, he paid Paul Sunday $500 for the information about Little Boston. But as a way to hurt and antagonize Eli, he lies and says he paid him $10,000. Whenever I hear that line, I just cackle every time. Without fail, it makes me laugh out loud.
He has his own company now, a prosperous little business.
Three
wells producing $5,000 a week. I chose the same quote.
It's a great lie.
I broke you and I beat you. It was Paul who told me about you. He's the prophet. He's the smart one. He knew that what was there and he found me. Like, I chose the same quote.
Stop crying, you sniveling ass.
Sniveling ass.
You're just the afterbirth.
Should put you in a jar.
Put you in a glass jar on the mantelpiece.
But I don't know, just him lying about the money, it just kills me every time.
I think
so
it's
funny.
Great because he's just attacking him and stabbing.
He's harassing him. It's
and
fun.
I wonder if he knows he's going to kill him in that moment, but he's just fucking with him.
I think he decided when he saw him.
This whole scene, he's just fucking with him so much.
Yeah.
And he's doing everything he can to just emotionally destroy him before he murders him.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was looking through some articles online. And
well, let's get back into the episode now.
Yeah. I was looking at some articles and it was a pretty notable media outlet. I can't remember, but their website, the person who wrote the article they literally said that they thought Daniel paid Paul $10,000 for the knowledge. Like, they thought that. They didn't realize that he was lying to Eli. I was like, did you even fucking watch the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I stumble across false information or like articles or stuff where people get things wrong. And I'm like, see you later. I'm not reading the rest of this.
And then there was another one from another seemed like major website that said that it was never clear whether Paul and Eli were the same person. I was like, clear. They're fucking twins.
It's very clear. I saw one where it said that Eli was trying to sell Daniel the Sunday Ranch. But he's trying to sell the Bandy tract.
He already bought the Sunday Ranch. It was the first ranch he bought.
The first thing he bought in Little Boston was the Sunday Ranch.
Oh my God.
So it's like they don't even watch these movies, and yet they are writing movie reviews for major publications. They don't even know what the fuck they're talking about.
Unbelievable. The first thing he purchased in the movie, the first thing he bought was the Sunday Ranch.
That we see him buy.
Yeah, in the movie, yeah.
Yeah, in Little Boston, it's the Sunday Ranch.
Yeah.
Because we can assume he may have bought that other tract.
Which one?
From the family, the couple.
I would say it's possible that he bought that.
I think it's possible.
I would say.
I think he probably did.
I would say he did, and he built up his office living quarters in that area.
Yeah, I bet you that's where Paul came to see him.
Yeah, whatever. They never actually say what town that was.
The first ranch he buys in Little Boston is the Sunday Ranch, and the person that was reviewing it was like, "Oh, he's trying to sell him the Sunday Ranch." I'm like, "Did you watch the movie? It's selling him the Bandy tract."
My God.
Now, I left you all on a cliffhanger before we went to our intermission and did our superlatives for There Will Be Blood. Now, the cliffhanger was, why was Daniel Plainview unable to be a successful father to HW after he became deaf from the accident when the oil rig and oil derrick exploded from the geyser? I'm guessing was a bunch of natural gas or something inside there, which caused the explosion, caused HW to lose his hearing. Daniel Plainview, one of his greatest strengths, or probably his greatest strength at being a con man, a businessman, a professional, is his ability to communicate and talk. Now, up until this point, he's always been able to converse and mold HW into the boy he's always wanted, into the next line of Plainviews, and been able to raise him. Obviously not the best father, not a perfect father, but he's been a father, a present father. He cares about him very much. He loves him because he can communicate with him, because he can talk to him. And Daniel, he's not going to learn sign language to communicate with this boy. It's the last thing he wants to do.
Flap, 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 flap.
Now, their relationship deteriorates at this point because he can no longer speak to HW with HW understanding what he's saying. That's the way he's always been able to control everyone in his life, whether it's HW, whether it's the people who work for him. So since he can no longer speak to HW without him hearing what he's saying, he can't control HW. He can't give his affection and love to HW the way he wants, the way he knows, the way he can control every situation of his life. And also, because HW loses his hearing, this veil, for me, in my opinion, gets lifted of Daniel Plainview, of his father, and you can actually see the man that he truly is outside of this speaking. He can't hear his father's voice anymore. He can actually just see his actions and see what he does to people, see how he treats people, and see the kind of person he truly is. And they eventually start to hate each other. And I think this is the reason why. Obviously, he sends his son away because he doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't know how to deal with it. But their relationship just gets worse and worse throughout the years until Daniel disowns HW because he can't communicate with him in the way he usually can, so he can't control him. And HW truly gets to see Daniel and his father for who he is without the speaking, the public speaking persona, the great eloquency, the great ability to persuade people to his point of view and his side from speaking. He can't get that from him anymore. He can truly see who he is.
That's a great point. And an example of that is actually the initial injury where we have that excellent long take where Daniel carries HW across the landscape of the oil derrick site into the mess hall. And then he sets HW on the mess hall table, concerned about his son, and keeps asking him, tell me where it hurts, tell me where it hurts, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? And HW can't communicate what's wrong. He just keeps saying, I can't hear my voice. And then once Daniel realizes that he can't communicate with his son, he leaves him. And then just goes to focus on the oil derrick and knocks down those lines. And then it just watches the derrick burn all night out of glee and jubilation. And so I totally agree with you. That's an excellent point. And I also think that, but I will disagree that I think that HW, he has a kind heart. And you see that in the relationship with Mary, the child. And I think that he would have grown to he would have grown to put up a barrier between him and his father eventually as he grew older, because as a boy he idolizes his father, does whatever his father says. His father is like the coolest guy ever. And so in a way he's blinded to the real shortcomings and the nefarious qualities of his father. But I think that HW, he is generally a good human being and a decent person. I think he would have seen through the veil of his father eventually as he grew older. I think that was inevitable, although I think that you're absolutely right. Losing his hearing, loses his connection with his father, where his father can no longer keep him on his side and persuade him to look at things in the same perspective as himself, especially because Daniel refuses. So here's the other part of it. He doesn't know how to, he doesn't have the fatherly qualities or the nurturing qualities to take care of a boy who can't hear anymore. And that goes to the point where Daniel refuses to ever learn sign language, to the point where 20 years pass by and he still doesn't know a lick, not a single sign.
He makes fun of it.
He refuses to ever learn sign. And that's a reason, that's a testament to him not being a nurturer, not caring enough for the boy. Ultimately, I think it revealed, even though he loved HW, that love wasn't really that deep. It wasn't deep enough for him. If he truly, truly deep down loved HW wholeheartedly like one of his own kin, he would have learned sign to be able to communicate with his child. You know what I mean? Where he did love HW. They did have a father-son relationship. And I do think that even in the final confrontation where Daniel rejects him and pushes him away and attacks him, he's doing it to hide the love that he has for HW, and it's really that's where his pain is. He's feeling that he's been rejected by the only person he's ever loved, and so that he's acting out and lashing out on HW because of the pain he feels. So there's no doubt that he loves HW, but if he truly had a true familial bond and love, like that deep resonant love a father and son can have in his eyes, then he would have learned sign for the boy, but he didn't. And that's an example of him ultimately not being the true father to his son. And that was the shortcomings of him, as he always chose the business over his son. Going back to the oil derrick during the fire is an example of that. And not choosing to learn sign over the course of 20 years, not even a single conversational sign over 20 years to help communicate with his son, to tease his translator and to tease his son for not being able to speak on his own. That is a testament to him not being a true father.
Yeah, his biggest failure in his whole life is fatherhood. You could also argue that if H.W.
Love.
Love or both in fatherhood. You could argue that if H.W. never went deaf, maybe Daniel wouldn't have become such a hateful person in his later years because he no longer had a familial connection to anybody. I mean, when Mary and H.W. get married, Daniel's not there. His best man is his translator, and he's the teacher with him on the oil rig and when he was growing up. And then he's the same guy. That's his best man at his wedding. And then obviously he's there with him with Daniel at the final scene. But
I would disagree. So I would say that Daniel, it was inevitable. Daniel, like he said to Henry, he wants to gain enough money to build a home where he doesn't have to be around other people. And what's HW's motivation at the end of the film? To start his own company so that he can work in the fields again, so he can get back to the early days of the business. I think that Daniel still would have gone down that path of isolating himself and self-destruction, and HW wouldn't have wanted that path no matter what. So I think that their disconnect and the disillusionment of the relationship was going to happen, and it was inevitable, even if they were real father and son, because of the directions of both their lives and what they wanted. Daniel wanted to get away from the world, and HW wanted to embrace the world. So they have complete opposite perspectives on the world. But that does not mean that Daniel Plainview is not extremely devoted and deeply loving of his son and how it affects him. It has huge impacts and implications on his behavior and many of the conflicts of the film. So first of all, do you know about the 2 deleted scenes?
I don't think so.
So there's a deleted scene of HW cutting Daniel's hair. Have you seen that?
I think I actually have.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't seen it. It's a great scene that PTA cut out, but it's just a simple scene of HW giving Daniel a haircut. It seems to be the early days of the little Boston enterprise. It's very cute, and they have this cute thing where he accidentally kind of nicks Daniel's neck, and then Daniel's like, oh, and then they react, but he giggles about it. He's like, hey, it's okay, don't worry. They laugh about it. It's a very cute scene. And then there's some more of the there's some deleted footage online you can see of Daniel with HW at the restaurant. And there's actually more improvisation. And they actually both break character and they both laugh after they cut the scene but keep the cameras rolling. And it's very cute where you see Daniel Day-Lewis and the young actor laughing for a couple of seconds. Showcases that Daniel Day-Lewis isn't as intense as people imply he is. He's goofing off after a take. You know what I mean? Now, the devotion and love he has for HW affects him in negative ways. And so an example of this is how defensive he gets about the boy, especially with Tilford. When Tilford has that meeting with him, Standard Oil wants to buy up all of the land and all of the leases, and Daniel is there with Henry to make the deal. And Tilford makes the very congenial, trivial, and non-confrontational suggestion of, I don't know, spend more time with your boy. Because Daniel says, what would I do with myself? And that sets Daniel off. He says, like you said, that crazy thing, the insane thing of saying, one night I'm gonna sneak into your house while you're sleeping, I'm gonna cut your throat. He says this to someone who's trying to do a business deal with him. And Tilford's like, what are you talking about? Why are you talking insane? It's because he's so defensive about the boy and the relationship he has with them. He also drunkenly berates Tilford at the restaurant later on, making fun of the deal that he passed on to do the pipeline. He's also extremely defensive, kisses HW many times, and he goes up to Tilford. He says, you see that boy? Don't you tell me how to raise my family. Don't you tell me. Didn't I tell you not to tell you how to raise my family? You don't have to shout. You don't have to shout. And then, obviously, he sends the boy away. We talked about he actually is crying and holding back the tears, but when HW comes back, he's so happy, and he's hugging him, he's kissing him. He's like, my boy, it's so good to have you back. He's clearly, genuinely so happy to have HW back.
He doesn't need himself to buy land anymore.
Exactly, at 100%. And then, but before that, when Eli gets the best of him for a moment, and he brings him to the church with Band, he brings him to the church, and then Eli gets to have his moment of dominating Daniel for the first time. And he gets Daniel, he berates him in front of everybody, and he gets him to keep admitting and saying over again that he abandoned his child. I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my boy. You can see the pain. You can see the anguish. You can see the regret on his face and his performance and the inflection of his voice. Day-Lewis translates it perfectly on camera. And you can see how much he regrets his decision of sending HW away and how it's tormenting him inside and eating him up inside. And saying out loud in front of other people is probably like being in his own personal hell. It's devastating to him to realize the terrible thing, the betrayal of his own son, and the desertment of his own son. And also, another great thing, it's very small, but early on in the Boston sequences, they're having HW and Daniel are just sitting by a campfire. And then HW says to Daniel, Mary says her father beats her if she doesn't pray. And then Daniel says, oh, Mary is the little one? And HW nods, yeah. And PTA holds on this, and we see as Daniel watches his son just look into the fire. Clearly, HW is distressed about this. The girl who's become his friend and will eventually be his wife, but he clearly cares for this little girl. And Daniel sees that this is causing him pain. So what does he do? There's a sequence when the drill begins, and they have that ceremony, and they have like a big luncheon with the entire townsfolk. We go to a scene with Daniel. He catches Mary as she's running across the area. She's wearing a nice, beautiful new white dress, and he says, do you like this new dress? Are you glad I came here? And he says, your father doesn't beat you anymore. He doesn't hit you anymore. And she goes, nope,
No more hitting.
no more hitting. All right, go run along now and don't ever come back. And then PTA genius blocker that he is, then he cuts to the other reverse shot, and we see that Abel Sunday has been there the whole time, just a couple seats away, heard the entire interaction. So clearly, off camera, in a scene we didn't see, Daniel Plainview spoke with Abel, probably threatened him, and said, if you ever hurt your daughter again, I'll probably fucking kill you. And so he did that because of the love he has for HW, because he knew that Mary's suffering was causing him pain, and so Daniel wanted to alleviate HW's pain by stopping Abel from ever hitting Mary again. So that's another indication for his deep love that he did have for HW.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that if he didn't lose his hearing, they'd still be able to communicate, and they'd still have a much closer relationship. Maybe they would have grown apart a little bit, but not to the extent at the end of the film. They would not have grown apart in such separate ways. Daniel even says to him, over the years, you've just grown to hate me. I doubt they would have hated each other to that point. That's what I'm saying, is that if they could still communicate, then Daniel wouldn't be feeding into every impulse of his hatred towards the world, and also HW wouldn't hate Daniel, and they wouldn't be butting heads. He wouldn't be going on his own business.
Well, so I would argue that Daniel is just so self-destructive. It would have happened eventually. And then him saying, you've been building up your hatred towards me, is that just in Daniel's head? Because HW clearly still loves his father and wants to maintain a relationship. He's probably doing everything he can to maintain a relationship.
But it's because he can't,
but in Daniel's
communicate with him.
Yeah, but
that's what I'm saying.
But what I'm saying is that even if he could still hear and they did communicate, Daniel would have pushed HW away regardless. Because
I don't think so.
Because he's not of his own blood. He would have eventually seen him in the sour light and would have always come to the conclusion that HW is doing something behind my back and he hates me and everything he does is against me, because that's who Daniel is as a person.
I think Daniel would have taken him more seriously as a partner if he could still communicate with him. That's just what I'm saying. And I think
I do agree he looks down on the boy after he can't hear anymore. He does look down on him.
He treats him differently. That's all I'm saying. I don't think that he would be the extreme hateful person at the end of the film if his son didn't lose his hearing. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Not that it's his son's fault. It's his fault for not being a loving father.
So I would just say he was going to end up down that road regardless.
Maybe it would have taken another dozen years or so. But I think that's such an important scene and so incredible. Adult HW coming in and confessing to his father that he's going to go start his own company. And I think there's one of the most important moments of the entire film is after Daniel denounces HW as his son to his face, Paul Thomas Anderson does a quick little flashback, and he shows the sequences And after we've had the sequence of hateful Daniel being angry and negative and denouncing his son to his face, treating him like a common pleb to him, we cut to a flashback of the Daniel that we like and we started the film with, enjoying in a what looked like a good father and cared about his boy. And he's teasing HW with his other guys around him. But then what does Daniel do? Instead of staying with his son, he walks towards the oil derrick. So he chooses oil over family.
He also, in his old age, embraces hate towards everything.
Because he doesn't have family anymore. Because I think that once HW loses his hearing, he no longer considers him his son. Because he can't communicate with him.
I mean, yeah, it's a good point. I think that Daniel would have gone down that road no matter what, because he revealed to Henry all those details about hating everybody who was, and then HW, he knows deep down, is not his true son. So I think he would have eventually ended up hating HW no matter what.
I just think he loses his control over HW and his, what you could say, trance on HW when he can no longer speak to him.
It's a good point. I mean,
that's his great strength. Now, we haven't even talked
I was about to say.
We haven't even talked about Eli.
Pauldano.
But before Eli, though, I want to talk about Johnny Greenwood first, because I'll be a little quicker.
Yeah.
Because Johnny Greenwood is such an incredible composer, obviously a guitarist of Radiohead, and Paul Thomas Anderson is a huge Radiohead fan, and asked Johnny Greenwood to do this film after he scored the film Body Song. Now, I love this score so much, and Johnny Greenwood's such a fascinating composer for film now. And I think of all the movies I've ever seen in my entire life, when you think about the score, very few times is the score specifically just written for one character. This entire score is for Daniel Plainview. It's not for anybody else. That's a rare thing, because it also enhances the character so much and brings so much more to it. His primary influences for the score were Olivier Messiaen, as well as Christophe Penderecki. Am I saying that right? Christophe
Penderecki. Yeah.
Penderecki. His music has been used in many horror films, as well, like films like The Exorcist and The Shining. Jesus Christ! Let me talk. You just talk for like 8 minutes straight, dude. Penderecki's his music's been used in many films like The Exorcist and The Shining. And Greenwood's scores also, his score for this film reminds me a lot about the connection that Bernard Herrmann made with Alfred Hitchcock for Psycho in that classic. And I love so much the score because at times it can be gorgeous, beautiful, meditative, but then on a flip of a coin, in an instant, it can become erratic, cruel, angry, and exciting. Just like Daniel Plainview, he can be very polite and eloquent and gentlemanly, then immediately become very sinister and evil and hateful.
Yeah, and Johnny, his music, nobody makes music like him in film. And PTA, before he hooked up with Johnny Greenwood, his scores were odd, Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love, very strange, non-traditional music that works so well. Again, hearkening back to Robert Altman, who liked to do music like that as well. Boogie Nights doesn't count. There's a lot of popular culture music in that.
Soundtrack.
Yeah, it's just, but with Johnny Greenwood, he's a really special composer, and the way he writes for strings and then also for percussion is really interesting. I think it's one of the more interesting scores made in the century, and absolutely one of the most creative and inventive scores I've heard in film in the last 20 years. He did, however, not receive any Oscar nominations. I understand why. So the Oscars, they have pretty strict rules and guidelines for being nominated. And Johnny Greenwood for There'll Be Blood did not get nominated because the score was ruled ineligible due to its use of pre-existing material. So this is actually material from the composer Arvo Pärt, as well as the composer Brahms, as well as Johnny Greenwood's own music from previous work. So most notably, the track Convergence, which happens during the oil gusher, the long take with the percussion. That's actually something Johnny Greenwood wrote, but that music came out a few years before this film came out, so it was actually pre-existing material. And then also the Johann Brahms song, Violin Concerto in D. It's the dun 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 dun. So
The ending song, the outro.
So it actually happens twice in the film. It happens during the ending credits.
Oh, and when they do the red derrick.
Yeah, when they start the drill.
Yeah.
Happens then. So a thing with the Academy is they basically something they say is if the music that plays in your film kind of becomes like the main theme of the film or like a main feeling for the film, and it's not made by the composer, we can't qualify it for the Oscars. And so that song in particular being used twice heavily, it kind of is like a recognizable, you could say, theme for the film. And since Greenwood didn't write that I think was the major disqualifier. Also, I mean, the Arvo Parr song, it's only about 2 minutes. It's during the montage of Mary and Eli in Little Boston. Mary in HW in Little Boston for about 2 minutes. But the longest track that's used that's not his is the Brahms track and the Convergence track, which is Greenwood, but he made it years before. So I understand why they disqualified him. But, I mean, nothing that year came even close to what Johnny Greenwood did for what he did make for the film. And it's a really remarkable album. Crafting sounds that you rarely see in film, and it works so well with the picture. It's a very special piece of music and composition that he crafted, and he also did wonderful work for The Master and Inherent Vice as well. I just love Johnny Greenwood, and he made one of my favorite themes of the last several years with Phantom Thread.
Yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful themes I've
House
heard.
of Woodcock.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable, beautiful, like sultry, just elegant theme. And it just really illustrates the idea of couture and beauty and fashion, high fashion, perfectly. And I love that theme. It's one of my favorite themes in recent memory, but he's such a great guy. And now I can't picture a PTA movie without Johnny Greenwood score, unless it's like a Licorice Pizza where he's using a soundtrack again.
Super great guy.
Yes, super cool.
Anthony's met him.
Johnny.
It reminds me of why he didn't get nominated. It's kind of like a lot of composers, sometimes they'll repeat themselves, obviously. And I think one of the most glaring examples is with Hans Zimmer for Inception with the song Time, which is arguably might be the most popular film score song of the century. The plays on that is absurd on all platforms. It might be the most played ever. And he pretty much did the same song for the end of 12 Years a Slave. It's very close.
It's actually not 12 Years a Slave. It's the Thin Red Line theme.
So Thin Red Line. Time's based off that.
I'll tell you what happened.
Tell us what happened, Anthony.
So Steve McQueen loves Hans. He loves Hans. And Steve McQueen's film Shame, Hans didn't score it.
It does sound like Thin Red Line playing in my head.
But there's a sequence in Shame with Michael Fassbender, which was Steve McQueen's second film. There's a sequence where he's breaking down and just basically falling apart into self-destruction. There is a 6-minute musical track that sounds literally identical to a track in the Thin Red Line, which Hans Zimmer did for Terrence Malick. What happens a lot with directors is they'll hire a composer and be like, I want it to sound like this. And so 12 Years a Slave, I guarantee you, Steve McQueen just loves that music so much. I'm sure he just went to Hans and said, just make it sound like Thin Red Line. That's what I want. That's what works for the sequence in my mind. And so you can't really say Hans Zimmer repeated himself when maybe behind closed doors in the private meetings, Steve McQueen was probably like, just make it sound like Thin Red Line. That's how I pictured it in my head. So that's probably my guess as to what happened with that, which is why it sounds so similar to Thin Red Line.
Yeah, it's just, and also,
But he does, I'm not saying Hans doesn't repeat himself, because Pirates is Gladiator.
Yeah, but so the track is actually Journey to the Line.
Journey to the Line, yes.
From the Thin Red Line. But the same sound, but like the ending songs of both 12 Years a Slave and Inception, that's what I'm talking about. So Time and Inception, the end of 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah, but sometimes
they're more similar than they are to the Journey to the Line.
But also, but Journey to the Line is in there with 12 Years a Slave. It's in there.
Yeah, I get it.
And I'm saying, like, Steve McQueen is probably like, just make it sound like these tracks. Yeah.
You did it. Just do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Like, composers repeat themselves, and it's fine.
For sure.
It works.
Yeah.
Works for the story.
Yeah.
I mean, John Williams, a lot of his stuff sounds similar.
Yeah, E.T.'s all over.
He took a lot of inspiration from the past as well. We all know that. But we're all cool with it. It's fine, bro.
Did you know about the bookends of this film? The bookends?
The music bookends?
No, just the story bookends.
Let me think.
This movie, it opens and ends with Daniel Plainview bashing something. So the movie opens with Daniel Plainview in the tunnel using a pick, bashing it against stone, looking for silver. And then the movie ends.
There she is.
With Daniel bashing Eli Sunday's face with a bowling pin.
Now let's talk about Eli Sunday.
Let's go. Fucking Paul Dano. We're 2 hours in and we didn't even get into it yet.
His relationship with Daniel Plainview.
Now, first, I want to talk about the casting. Before we get into the character, let's talk about the casting. So, Paul Dano was cast just as Paul Sunday. Now, Paul Thomas Anderson loved him in a previous film he was in. Actually, he co-starred in a film with Daniel Day-Lewis, which was directed by Day-Lewis's wife, Rebecca Miller. And Paul Dano played supporting actor in that film. Now, he cast Paul Dano as Paul Sunday, a very small role. He imagined Paul Sunday to actually be a young boy, but he liked Paul Dano so much, he was like, I'm going to change the role and make it be a slightly older character. Paul Dano, I'm guessing, was probably 18, 19 at the date of filming this film. And so, the film was called, what was it? The Ballad of Jack and Rose. Daniel Day-Lewis, Paul Dano, Rebecca Miller directed it. So nice little independent film. And so that was Paul Dano's role. Paul Sunday, that one scene, that's it. And the scene where he sells the information to Daniel Plainview for the information for Little Boston. That was it. And now another actor was actually cast as Eli Sunday, named Kel O'Neill. Kel O'Neill played Eli Sunday for 2 weeks of principal photography. 2 weeks of shooting with Daniel Day-Lewis. And he ended up backing out of the film. There's a little drama and rumors going around. Many said in the media that he was intimidated by Daniel Day-Lewis's intensity and habit of staying in character on and off set. That was BS. Anderson, Day-Lewis, and O'Neill all denied this claim. This is just the media getting clickbait. Day-Lewis said, I absolutely don't believe that was the case, that he was intimidated by me. I happen to believe that, and I hope I'm right. And Kel O'Neill, the man himself, also says that he also dismissed this claim, and he said that he came to the conclusion of leaving the film because of his poor working relationship with Anderson and his own disinterest in acting coming twofold. And so he left the production. Now, Paul Thomas Anderson, in the middle of production, had 2 weeks worth of shooting. He couldn't work with it. He couldn't use it. It was unusable footage. There's really no way around this. So as a way to make up for this, they had no time to cast anyone. He said to himself, what if I make Paul and Eli identical brothers and use Paul Dano as Eli for the rest of filming? I'm sure he was impressed with what Paul did on set and said, I bet he can handle this. And so he ended up casting Paul Dano in the next role of Paul Sunday. And then they reshot those older sequences that they filmed over 2 weeks with Paul Dano. And then Paul Dano finished out the rest of the film as Paul Sunday. Paul Dano only got 4 days of notice before he had to...
2 days.
Only 2 days of notice before he had to start filming opposite the greatest actor who ever lived. So I'm sure that was an extremely daunting task. And I will say, Paul Dano, I think, did a terrific job considering the incredibly taxing and I'm sure intimidating process of working with Daniel Day-Lewis with only 2 days worth of notice with such a juicy, meaty role. I really love his performance as Eli Sunday, and I think it's a terrific opposing force for Daniel Plainview.
Yeah, they are such a great pairing of characters to go against each other. And the mystery of who Eli Sunday is on a first watch of There Will Be Blood is terrific because we are introduced to Paul, like we talked about earlier. He has this information of land that has oil, his home, and he's trying to sell that information. Basically, could be false, could be true, to Daniel Plainview, gets $500, points out Little Boston on a map, and that's when HW and Daniel take their trip to the Sunday Ranch, where they meet Abel and his family. And then, Abel, you stupid man.
Stupid son to a stupid father.
Abel. Killing my throat. And who brings them wood for their fire while they're camping for quail hunting? None other than Eli Sunday, who when you're watching this movie, you're like, was he conning them? Is it him? Then we realize they are identical twins. This is not a rumor.
This person has never met them before.
It's not a theory. This is fact. They are really identical twins. No matter what you hear on the internet or see online. They are twins. They are separate people. They're like me and Anthony.
PTA just doesn't like to use too much exposition. He doesn't hold your hand while you're watching his movie.
We don't need Daniel to go, hey. Well, obviously
They don't want to
reveal that they know Paul, but
they
they're
don't say it
also,
to themselves. They're not like, whoa, he looks just like that guy Paul. You think they're twins?
They just look at each other, which is great. And then we learn so much about Eli, and he becomes such an incredible character. And these two butt heads because they are the exact opposites of the same coin, and they have so many similarities as well as differences. You know, throughout this entire film, Eli is trying to be an equal to Daniel, and he himself is a reflection of Daniel Plainview. They both have this gift of speaking. You know, what I love about Paul Thomas Anderson with this film specifically is naming characters, and I think he chose the names Daniel Plainview very specifically because Daniel in Hebrew means, what does it means?
Well, that's the character's name in the book.
Okay, never mind.
So he didn't choose
Well,
it.
Plainview, didn't he change it? Well, maybe Sinclair. Because in Hebrew it means God's mercy, and then Plainview is obviously like plain speaking, public speaking, because he's such a great public speaker. Maybe that's what Sinclair is going for. But they both have this incredible gift of public speaking, preaching in a way.
Well, what's the Eli side of that?
Eli's just a biblical name.
Oh.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
I thought you were
I was just
gonna-
talking
I thought
about
you were gonna say
because
that-
Daniel Plainview, plain speaking.
That backfired.
It did backfire. Damn it. God damn it. Nope. Just wasting time on Google today. What does Daniel mean?
Daniel, name meaning.
But they both have this gift for public speaking. They know how to entrance an audience. They are great at luring people into their mindset. For Daniel, it's for taking advantage of their money, taking advantage of their land to buy. For Eli, it's, you could say he's fueled by money to an extent and very similar to Daniel, but he goes about it by different ways. He's not going to get his hands dirty, but he's also after people's souls in a lot of ways, and their support and their worship of him. So they're both great public speakers. They both share this desire for wealth. Daniel obviously acquires much wealth and multiple times throughout the film. Eli asks Daniel for money. He wants to get that 5,000 signing bonus, which he is told by Daniel he'll get when they are eating dinner. He signs that deal.
I'd love to do business with you.
And where will the road lead to the church? That's the first place it will lead to. And then the second time Eli asks Daniel for his money for the church, Daniel beats him in front of people, buries him in the mud basically, and then the final time he asks him for money, obviously is the third act of the film, the third meeting later on. Or not the third meeting, but later on in the film when he kills him. And I just love how Daniel's hatred for Eli grows so much throughout this film. And I think it's because he sees so much similarities in Eli as he sees in himself.
Can I build off the similarities?
Hold on real quick. But the one difference is Eli, you could argue, is delusional in his obsession with the superstition and faith, whereas Daniel is a total non-believer but will say anything he has to get land.
Yeah. So they're both snake charmers in a way. And Daniel's worst quality is his greed. And then Eli's worst quality is his vanity. He loves attention. Daniel doesn't like attention. He doesn't like confusion. He doesn't like large groups of people around him. Eli loves it. He savors it. He savors people looking at him. He savors people following him, people listening to him. He loves it. So he's a very vain person. He's fueled by vanity. They're both actually very greedy for money. They both want as much money as they can. Eli is constantly asking Daniel for money, and I'm sure they don't show it, but I'm sure he's constantly asking his congregation for money. And then it gets to the point where they actually both build wooden structures that are adored by the townsfolk. So Daniel builds an oil derrick out of wood, which is adored by the town. It's bringing wealth and industry to the city, to the town. And then Eli builds a new church out of wood. It looks like the same kind of wood, too. And this church is a place for worship and a place for people to find meaning and spirituality in their lives and connection to their God. So they both build important wooden structures that are adored by the townsfolk. They're both liars, and they both take a grasp of the townspeople in their own ways. Daniel swindles them into giving them their properties and coaxes them with dreams of a beautiful, bountiful future of prosperity. Whereas Eli coaxes them into believing that he can eliminate evil spirits from their bodies and bring them peace and everlasting life in worship and praise of him and his connection to the Holy Spirit and to their God. He says that he has a connection and a vocabulary and a dialogue with God, and they believe every second of him.
That's one goddamn hell of a show.
Eli puts on a performance every time he does a sermon. His sermons aren't just reading gospel. His sermons aren't just speaking about themes in the stories written in that Old Testament. He is putting on a show and showcasing powers that he clearly doesn't have, but those in his congregation believe he has, a connection to their deity. But I would say their opposites are in their Daniel hates attention, and he hates people, whereas Eli loves attention, he loves adoration, and he is self-possessed by vanity.
And they both want to acquire wealth.
I will say, so but the also biggest difference is Daniel is a brilliant businessman, and Eli is a terrible businessman. Eli, I'm sure you can gather, has generated quite an income from his preaching, from his church, the Third Revelations, and then also through working in radio. But he says his investments have failed. The Great Depression, you can say, is definitely a cause for that. And so he's definitely made an income, but he's fallen into ruin, whereas Daniel has only prospered. So that's another major difference. Eli is a terrible business person.
They're both after wealth at their own means, different ways. And one of the most telling examples of that is when Daniel comes to the church after there's been the fatal injury for the worker on the oil derrick. And obviously, Eli says, if you just let me bless the well, this would never have happened. This gives him more of a delusional power over the town of Little Boston, because I'm sure he's telling the congregation, if I was there to bless the well, this would never have happened. He tells Daniel that. And Daniel's trying to get him to be like, look, all of my workers are spending all of their time here worshiping with you. They need to be working at the oil derrick. They need to have a clear mind.
They need sleep.
They need sleep, yes. And I can't blow gold all over this place without my workers. Then Eli says something else, but then he says again, I can't blow gold all over the place without them. And then Eli gets it. He's like, all right. He's basically, I can't get money if all of his workers are here, because they're both fueled by money. No matter what Eli says to his congregation, no matter what he says to Daniel, he cares about money just as much as Daniel. And he's at a competition with Daniel this entire film for power and control over Little Boston. He's going after the hearts and minds of the people of Little Boston, their souls and their spirits and their faith, where Daniel is going after their money and over the prosperity that he promises. He's going with false promises of what he'll build and what he'll bring there. Both are bringing false promises to them. Eli's not curing that woman of arthritis. And
you have arthritis, don't you?
And Daniel is not building churches. He's not bringing bread. He is not building roads.
No
They're
farms.
Both full of false promises.
He said there's bread will be coming out your ears, is what he says.
They didn't do any irrigation. There's no farming anywhere. So they both just built their entire...
They're both false prophets.
...followings off lies. Although you can argue that Daniel is the third revelation, which we'll talk about from that ending scene. And I believe that Eli makes Daniel a worse person. He brings the worst out of Daniel because Daniel sees so much of himself in Eli, and he sees a competition for dominance. They have a back and forth of dominance where the majority of the film, Daniel constantly has dominance over Eli, especially when he embarrasses him by beating him and slapping him and covering him in oil and mud in front of those other people. That's the ultimate form of dominance he does in this film, despite the fact, before he kills him in the third act, where he does get the upper hand on Daniel for a little bit. He does experience dominance over Daniel after Daniel is approached by Bandy, or he's trying to get Bandy's tract so he can build the pipeline through Bandy's tract to go to the ocean, so he doesn't have to make the deal with Standard, so he can make the deal with Union Oil to make so much more money, where Bandy will only let him build the pipeline on his tract and on his land if he is baptized at the church of the third revelation and he repents for the sin that he committed of murdering Henry, who he didn't know, but he saw, obviously, I'm sure he heard the gunshot when he was looking around and then saw the fresh dug grave, and he wants Daniel to repent. And when Daniel goes to the church and he gets baptized by Eli, this gives Eli complete power over him in the situation, not only spiritually and faithfully, but also for the entire town of Little Boston to watch Eli baptize Daniel. Gives Eli power
and humiliate
over,
him.
Yeah, gives him power over Daniel amongst the town, because he is the spiritual leader, and Daniel has come to get guidance from him and be baptized in the water of the Holy Spirit by Eli. But then I just want to know, like, what he whispered.
Oh, what do you
Eli's
think he
ear.
said to him?
He probably
because
said,
after the baptism, Daniel goes over to Eli, shakes his hand, and he whispers something in his ear, and then Eli looks at him horror struck.
I think that's when he told him, "I'm going to eat you."
I said, yeah, I think because later in the film when they have the interaction in the bowling alley, he goes,
I told you I would eat you.
I think he said, "I'm going to eat you."
I told you I would eat you.
I think Eli goes up to him. He says,
One day I'm going to eat you. I'm going to bury you underground.
And that's the one time that Eli really has true power over Daniel Plainview. He has a false sense of power with Daniel in the bowling alley when he thinks he's going to get this contract with him. Not power over him, but power with him. But Eli always sees himself and wants to be an equal to Daniel Plainview, even though he never will be.
that scene is actually a great instance of two character moments where a character whispers something to Daniel's ear that we don't hear as an audience, but we see the repercussions of it. So first of all, he says, we assume he said, I'm going to eat you, and it horrifies Eli. And then, so Daniel sits down in the booth with the rest of the congregation, and then little Mary comes up behind him and grabs him from behind, and from what I can tell, I assume that she whispers into his ear, telling him how much she misses HW and she wishes he could bring her back, and then she probably is asking him to bring HW back, because the next scene, what's the next scene? Cuts right to HW arriving during the pipeline's digging and encampment, and then Daniel embraces HW. So I'm guessing Mary in that moment begged Daniel to bring HW back.
It's possible, yeah.
That's my guess, because there's no reason. Why would PTA cut right to HW arriving? Why would he show Mary? Why would he have Mary grab Daniel from behind and whisper in his ear?
Well, I believe that's because Daniel has become kind of a surrogate father for her, and she's obviously part of the church.
I would say no, because she feels very uncomfortable around him. When he's talking about the dress and no more hitting, she's very uncomfortable. She clearly doesn't want to be in front of him.
Yeah,
I'm guessing, from what I take away from that moment, is she's begging him to bring HW back, because cutting right to HW's arrival after that shot is an indication that's what she was saying to him. Now, going back to Eli, what's really fascinating about Eli is that he and his brother Paul, although we never see them on screen together, they definitely have a terrible relationship, because Paul abandoned his family and took the knowledge that he and Eli definitely had about oil on their land and sold it to the first bidder he could find in Daniel Plainview for $500. He probably could have gotten a lot more for it. It seems like Paul is, although Daniel says he has a prosperous business, is that true? I'm not totally sure. Daniel's not always a reliable person when he's telling you things. Paul could have definitely gotten a lot more for the information of Little Boston.
Well, do you know how much $500 in 1911 was, Anthony?
I would say I would equate it to $10,000 today.
Pretty close. It's about $15,000.
Yeah.
Now, that's, I think, a reasonable amount of money for information that can be completely false.
Yeah, but I'm saying he could have gotten a licensing deal. He could have made a ton. He could have made a fortune.
How could he have done that?
I'll give you this information if you pay me $500 and give me 5% licensing back end.
Yeah, but he's not going to do that.
Yeah.
This is the best deal that Paul could have gotten. He's going to get away from the situation. He's going to go start a new life somewhere with a solid amount of money, $15,000 today. I mean,
well, yeah, if you equate that to what Daniel gets for the silver, and the opening of the film was $342, and that's where he builds up the capital to start drilling with the team and build the equipment and everything. So he got more than Daniel
Paul
did.
started a new life. I don't think there's any other deal he could have gotten. There's no way Daniel would have given him 1% on anything.
Okay.
Because there's no
Also,
it could be a lie.
I'm a bonehead. He didn't even own the land, so he can't
Yeah,
get a
exactly.
percentage.
Abel owns the land.
Abel owns the land.
Yeah.
So that's dumb of me to even bring that up. I'm taking that back.
You better take that. You can't. It's on camera, bro.
It was legally impossible for him to get any kind of licensing percentage.
Yeah, that's a really good deal, honestly.
Yeah.
Imagine if I gave you hey, go over there, Anthony, and you'll find something really cool. Can I have $15,000?
Better be really cool, man. So anyways, Paul abandoned his family. Paul abandoned Eli. You can imagine that he and Eli growing up, especially he mentions his uncle in the film, how his uncle said, my uncle always said there was oil there. They grew up probably encountering oil seepages all over the place, knowing that there's probably oil underneath the ground. And then Paul, you could say, basically betrayed the family, sold them out for his own gain, and benefited from it, and he abandoned his family. I'm sure that he and Eli had a tumultuous, negative relationship, and that's why they parted ways. And even Paul tells Abel, stupid son to a stupid father. Abel. I'll tell you how he found out. Paul sent him here. So in his mind, Paul betrayed him, and Paul definitely did betray his family. So it's definitely interesting to look at the character of Eli and know that his identical twin, his brother, the person you would expect to be closest with in life, they have parted ways and probably will never speak to each other again. That shows you. I mean, Eli's a very intense person. Imagine being identical twins with. If I was Eli, that would be pretty. That's a lot.
I'd distance myself from you as well.
It's a lot.
Well, I mean, imagine what it's like. Clearly, they're all of faith, and Paul is of faith too. He says, "God bless, God be with you." But you can see, I bet you that Eli, from a young age, started taking up this persona of being a Messiah-like figure, and obviously, Paul, the only way he could escape from his home in Little Boston is to sell this information and go off and live somewhere else and get out of that town, get off that ranch, which he never would have been able to escape without some money. It's selfish as hell, but it's his only way to get out of there.
That's a great point. Absolutely. Now, why did Daniel kill Eli?
Because he's giving into his full impulses at this point in his life. Like
he's like, fuck it!
He has no family. He's lost his connection to HW, which leads to every impulse, every negative and bad impulse to be turned to 1,000%. And his impulse to kill Eli Sunday, which he's always wanted to do, is finally here. He has nothing left to lose at this point. He's a billionaire, probably. He has more power than a god, than a president, possibly. He can get away with murder. I'm sure he's done it. He's done it before. He can do it again. And I think at this point,
I bet he's killed before the bandy track.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's killed after the bandy track. At this point, I think he's like, I have nothing left to lose. I don't care anymore. I'm going to do whatever I want.
So first of all, I want to point out something that always makes us laugh, and it's so funny. But it's just a very subtle character detail in the bowling alley scene. So the scene opens with Daniel passed out after a drunken stupor and binging, you could say, whiskey all night. He's passed out
all day.
He's out cold on the bowling alley floor. And then, I don't know the name of his servant. I can't remember the name of his servant, but his servant brings Eli into the room. And then they try waking Daniel up, and it doesn't work. And then the servant starts walking away, and then Eli keeps trying to wake him. Daniel. Then he screams, "Daniel, the house is on fire!" Screams it right next to his face. Nothing. Daniel doesn't
Snoring.
budge. He's still snoring soundly. And then Eli whispers, "Daniel, it's Eli. It's your brother Eli." And then Daniel's snoring stops, and he wakes up. The loudest noise in the world couldn't wake Daniel up, but hearing the word Eli and the softest whisper awoke in him from his slumber. It was amazing. I love that. It's one of my favorite parts of the film, and it cracks both of us up every single. It's just genius. It's so brilliant. It's just tongue in cheek, very darkly comic. You know, it doesn't make sense, but it's just like he hates Eli so much that it would wake him from his sleep more than anything else would wake him up.
There's so many great details in this film, and in this scene specifically. A great character detail for Eli in this scene that gives us so much information with just something very small and subtle that is just all the exposition we need for this character. He's coming in like a very nice and clean suit. He's got his big silver cross, nice combed hair. He looks like he's been doing well. And then he even tells Daniel he's been doing well. He goes to make drinks for him and Daniel. What's he do? He brings 3 glasses, obviously 2 for himself and 1 for Daniel, which shows that not only is he an alcoholic, he's definitely on hard times because he's getting 2 drinks for himself. He needs more than 1 drink at a time. So clearly just this small detail of him bringing over 3 glasses for 2 people tells us all the information we need to know about Eli immediately and what he's been up to.
Now, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thanks, man.
Because I noticed that every time, too.
That's what I do.
We've just never mentioned that to each other.
I know, right? We didn't have to, man. We don't need the exposition.
We save it for the show.
Yeah.
So the reason why I think Daniel killed him is it ties to you, to what you were saying about why he kills Eli. So I would say he killed Eli because he wanted to take everything away from Eli. So in this scene, he takes, step by step, everything away from Eli and tears him down piece by piece. So the first thing he does is he takes Eli's faith away by forcing him to scream at the top of his lungs that, "I am a false prophet. God is a superstition."
Louder, louder, Eli. This is your church, and you have a full audience. Speak to him like it's your congregation.
"I am a false prophet. God is a superstition."
One more time.
So he takes his faith away. And he takes away the facade of Eli, the preacher. Next, he takes his identity away. He claims Paul to be the chosen son.
Paul was chosen. It was Paul who was chosen. He came to me. It came $10,000 cash in hand. Where was poor Eli when Paul was suckling at his mother's teeth? He's the smart one.
Calls him the chosen one. He calls Paul the chosen one. Eli's always looked at himself as the chosen one, I'm sure. He's always looked at himself as having a connection to God, as having an open dialogue with God. So he strips him of his identity and showcases Paul as the true son of Sundays. Next, he takes away his potential future at Fortune. When Eli tries to sell him the bandy lot, the last great, what is he called? The last great untapped resource of Little Boston.
Yeah.
And I love it. Daniel coaxes him. He's like, "I'd love to do business with you." How long will it take? Shouldn't be long. I want $100,000 signing bonus plus
the $5,000 that's owed to me, plus interest.
It's only fair. It fucking cracks me up. He's just baiting him. He's coaxing him. He's just caressing him into this setup of torture. And so once he milks Eli for every ounce of joy and excitement he has, he tells him, "The land's gone. It's gone. Drainage." He reveals that there is no way that you could ever benefit from building oil derricks and drilling on the bandy track because since Daniel I own everything around it, so I get everything that's underneath it. Drainage. So it's futile to even buy the bandy property. Now, this takes away the potential future of a fortune and also of salvation for Eli. So he takes everything away from Eli. There's just one more thing left to take. That's his life. And he does that happily, gleefully, excitedly, as he chases him around the bowling alley, throws bowling balls at him, throws pins at him, and then bashes his skull in repeatedly with a bowling pin. So he takes everything away from Eli until all that he has left is his living breath, and then he takes that too.
He also takes his identity not only from his family, but also from his congregation and his faith, where he refers to himself, Daniel refers to himself as the third revelation.
I am the third revelation. I am the chosen one.
Because he was the chosen one to prosper from Little Boston.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I love Eli's face when Daniel agrees to the $100,000 signing bonus. He's like, "Oh my God, this is actually happening.
He's like, yeah, yes, yes. When he agrees to $100,000 signing bonus, it's only fair.
It's only fair. I love when Daniel wakes up and he's like dancing on the lane and he slaps the back of his head and then he chugs that bottle of water.
He drinks so much water.
It's great. I love it.
Because that's what you do when you're hungover. You're so dehydrated. Just fucking chug it. I wonder how, like, they must not have done too many takes of that because he drinks at least like 30 ounces right there on the spot.
Well, he drinks whiskey out of the flask to like wake up too. And then when Eli offers him a drink, he's like, "Oh no, thanks, not for me.
No thanks very much.
What is he chewing on? Is he chewing on steak?
Yeah, it's a steak.
Steak,
He's
like
just eating it with his hands.
Steak. he's pulling out like all the chewy bits. I love it. It's a point where Daniel Day-Lewis, he's playing it for laughs. You know what I mean? And the way he across the room. He's having fun. Yeah, it's great. I just crack up with like giddy glee.
Across the room. My straw goes across the room.
So Paul Thomas Anderson actually took that from an actual speech that a politician actually wrote. And they were at a congressional hearing of some kind. One second, let me find it. Okay, got it. So Anderson stated that the scene, "I drink a milkshake," was paraphrased from a quote by former Secretary of the Interior and U.S. Senator of New Mexico, Albert Fall, speaking before a congressional investigation into the 1920s oil-related Teapot Dome scandal. Anderson said he was fascinated to see that the word milkshake being used in the official testimony and terminology to explain the complicated process of oil drainage.
Actually, that was proven to be unprovable recently.
Really?
Yeah, so there's actually another article that says they could not
news.
They could not find the quote that Paul Thomas Anderson was talking about, and that person didn't actually say it. It's actually from something else. I believe it was proven to possibly be from a different politician from a different time.
Wow, I am so lost.
It's okay, man. Don't worry about it.
So confused.
Don't worry about it, dude. It's all good. People make mistakes. So it's all good, man.
It's Snopes. Snopes says
fact check false. So I think Paul Thomas Anderson just got confused when he was talking about it in that interview.
But speaking of drilling, I looked up how these old oil derricks actually used to work.
How do they work?
So, the classic oil derrick pump is known colloquially as a sucker rod pump, named for the plunger-like mechanics it uses to pump oil from the ground wells up to the surface. It uses a series of gears and cranks to pump a rod up and down an oil well in a piston-like motion, although much slower. This design is used to conserve energy while bringing a continuous, reliable flow of oil up from deep wells to the surface. Derricks are usually pyramidal in shape and offer a good strength-to-weight ratio. The earliest rigs were made of wood. They could be built up. Back then, drilling was a gamble as rigs couldn't easily be moved once they were built up. These wooden rigs also proved dangerous during blowouts or gushers, which we actually see in this film, as they could catch fire if sparked. Throughout this period, drilling rigs mostly used a percussive technique that worked by repeatedly slamming a cable tool into the ground. Now, this is what we see when the derrick has this rope coming up and down, up and down. And we don't really see what it's actually doing down there, but it's actually taking that bit, that long, heavy metal bit, and it constantly pummels it into the earth, and that is what drives oil back out of the ground, seeping it out of the ground. So constantly driving this drill bit into the earth over and over and over again. So that's what it's doing.
And after the guy dies, Daniel's like, "Oh, where's the body?
Where's the bit?
Where's the bit?
Where's the bit?"
He knows what the most valuable thing in the entire process is, the bit.
To stay on oil derricks, so Daniel Day-Lewis found inspiration from an actual oil tycoon as well as Los Angeles' history with oil, how it was once an oil city and still is, but let me get into this. It's pretty fascinating.
Can't wait.
So to quote Daniel Day-Lewis, "I studied the life of turn-of-the-century American oil tycoon Edward Deveney only insofar as I learned about the main events of his life. Los Angeles was actually founded on muck. It's an amazing thing. If you see the early photographs dating back to that period, it's actually a forest of oil derricks with little tiny houses sandwiched here and there in between them. If you happen to live in one of those little houses and stepped out the front door, what you would be confronted with would be a quagmire of crude oil just running down the streets. Your kids would be playing in that stuff. That was the world, and Los Angeles grew out of that and was founded on that wealth. Deveney was one of the principal characters in the building of that city. Indeed, there's a Deveney Drive named after him and probably some other roads. We filmed that last couple of scenes of the movie in the Deveney Mansion, which in every aspect, in every respect, feels like a pyramid, a monument that a pharaoh built for his own quiet self-destruction. It's interesting. Now, if you're...
And sorry, Deveney was actually the inspiration Upton Sinclair used when writing the novel.
That's awesome. So if you actually feel free to do this, Google, and Anthony will put some images up for the episode. Google Los Angeles oil derricks in the turn of the 20th century. It'll blow your mind. So these beach towns specifically like Venice, Marina del Rey, Santa Monica, these towns and cities were full of oil derricks everywhere. And there's some really incredible photographs of this that were taken back then, as well as lots of drawings and paintings done. But they were, as far as the eye could see, it was like trees. There were just oil derricks everywhere.
Well, that makes sense because it wasn't, back then it wasn't like it was just a couple of big companies like we see depicted in this film of Standard and Union Oil. It was like a gold rush. And so people would come out from all over, buy up any land they could, and just start drilling for oil. So it was a lot of tons of private contractors and individuals and independent drillers doing drilling all over. And so it wasn't just a couple of big corporations. It was probably hundreds and even thousands of people drilling all over the state.
Yeah, and obviously all those derricks are gone now in Los Angeles, but there is a massive oil drilling facility still on the west side in the beach towns. I can't remember which one it is specifically that there's this nasty, massive oil extraction facility in the water and on the coast that's just going to be there forever. But I'm sure that whatever company it is, they can just drill a lot deeper so they can access what all those other derricks are trying to just get the surface of.
I love the oil derrick in this film, and it's great to see the evolution. You start with a very small frame above the pit in the opening, and then we get like a bigger frame with the buckets on the pulleys, and then we get to the first derrick.
Those aren't even
That's
derricks.
not derricks, yeah. Those are just frames.
That looks like Michael Scott's table that he makes. Did you make that? Oh, I'm terrible at this stuff. Michael, did you make that?
I love that TV.
Dinner party. Best episode.
I love that TV. But the derrick's beautiful, and the ironwork, the craftsmanship, the wood, the gears. I love this film, and it seems to be very period accurate. And it looks like they actually had a real blacksmith actually working in the background as well. Just to have that detail of you have two oil workers working with the drill bit, and in the background there's a guy blacksmithing, making tools. It just seems correct. Everything about the film in the period setting, it seems like it's accurate and was well researched and engineered. There are actually a couple of old derricks like this that are still lying about across the country that are just kind of just like old monuments in a way to the old industry. But I really love the oil derrick. There's something powerful about it because in a lot of ways this country and industry and the Industrial Revolution happened because of oil production and the production of such powerful energy, cheap energy, to help fuel the factories, to help fuel the Industrial Revolution. So in a lot of ways, America was built because of the product of the drilling of oil. And so you can see how important the oil derrick as a symbol was to the proliferation of business and industry in America. And I think it's a fascinating symbol. It's very iconic. You don't think of really seeing oil derricks anywhere nowadays, especially because many of them are off the coast and over the ocean. But there's something about the oil derrick that just like it seeps into the consciousness of the history and roots of America and the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I mean it's a dirty industry.
Oh yeah,
it's just filthy coming from the ground,
grimy,
as well as the effect of the planet. But we would not have many of the luxuries of our day-to-day lives without the oil industry. And that's why I think this is such a fascinating symbol for the film, where it's kind of like a religious monument to the characters.
Yeah, and also this film, the color palette, if you look at it, it's really just earth tones. The color palette of the film is brown, green, and blue for the most time.
Beige, beige, brown, green, mostly.
You get earth, dirt, and then sky.
Sometimes there's little flashes of color like purple.
For a sunset.
Yeah.
But I really love the earthy tones. It grounds the film. It takes away any notion of stylization or forced stylization. And it makes you feel like, because Daniel Plainview has built his empire by digging in the dirt. And what he said, he scratches in the dirt to that other oil man. And so the color palette is a great representation of that. Of the earthy tones make you feel a connection to the earth and the ground and the earth and the dirt and digging and the pastures and the fields. And so I think it's a perfect color palette for the film. It works beautifully. We obviously get some oranges and reds during the fire. But for the most part, it's browns, greens, and blues. And that's basically the main color palette of the film. And it works beautifully, I think.
Hyper realistic.
Yeah.
Naturalistic.
Super
Duper
naturalistic.
Man, what a picture.
What a picture.
All the guns and the fighting.
Hold on, I had something else I was about to say.
Yeah, what are you going to say, man?
Hold on.
Come on, Anthony.
Can you say anything while I think? Bring up some fun facts?
I can bring up some stuff. Let's see what I got here. Do I have any fun facts written down? All right, so here we go. Paul Thomas Anderson told Entertainment Weekly magazine that the fake oil used throughout the movie included the stuff they put in chocolate milkshakes at McDonald's.
Nasty.
Yuck. Every Wednesday night during editing, Paul Thomas Anderson and company would have just steak and straight vodka for dinner to keep in the mentality of Daniel Plainview.
Okay, so I remember what I was going to say. That's great. Unless you want to keep
I'm
running
not
off trip.
done. Paul
Just saying, we usually do it at the end.
Paul Thomas Anderson planned to have the restored bowling alley used at the final climax of the film, located at the Greystone Mansion, to be entirely painted in white to give some Kubrick symmetry and menacing quality, a nod to 2001: Space Odyssey and Clockwork Orange. However, he changed it to its original state when it was later decided that the bowling alley was to be given away for ownership after filming.
The red works.
You may
The red works.
It does. It plays. You may proceed with whatever the fuck you were gonna say.
It's also the red is the foreshadow on the walls, I think, for the blood. We haven't really touched on the opening sequence in the pit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
It's such a striking thing, and it looked like it was a challenging thing to film. Obviously, they didn't really film it in a real pit, so I imagine the way they constructed it, unless they did.
It seems like he's really hitting rock. I don't know. It looks like
no, he's really hitting rock, but I wonder. Whenever I watch this movie, I wonder how they constructed it, or how
fucking tractor just went in there and dug a giant hole, bro.
I don't know. It's stone. So they
went in there with a giant machine. It's 20. They made it in 2006, dude.
All right.
They dig like 10,000 feet, no problem.
All right. So, but I think it's magnificent because the way he filmed it is so incredible. He first of all he cuts straight to Daniel hacking away with the pick. We're seeing the sparks come off, and the only light that's working in the scene is the sunlight from the opening above. And then there's a couple other shots where they go wider from within the cave, and we see more shots of Daniel. And then in the oil pit, it's a complicated sequence. That's something that they definitely built, and I'm guessing they built like this cylindrical square structure. It must have been maybe 60 feet tall, and then they put the dirt and oil in the bottom of that, and they covered the wood inside the interior walls with oil and shit. That's something I'm guessing they definitely built.
Like actual shit.
Yeah, so much shit because there's multiple things happening in that sequence and how they're shooting. Because first of all, they're shooting from above. They probably did all those shots first, and then they shot from like a medium length where they're not all the way down the pit, but then they can look down with the camera. And PTA did the wonderful shot of walking with the Steadicam towards the hole, and then tilting the camera into the hole, into the blackness, and then cut to tilting down from within the middle of what you would say is the pit down to the men working below. And there's a couple of different setups. First of all, there's the heavy mud setup, where that worker's working within the mud trying to pull the bit out. And then we also get the shots of oil has risen up pretty high, up to about waist high. The men are working in that. So they must have constructed some cool set where they could put the camera in the bottom of the pit while it's not like in the mud and stuff. So I'm guessing they built some kind of structure that could have been 3 or 4 feet tall, where the camera could shoot over that, and they could still showcase the floor of about 2 to 3 feet worth of mud and oil, It's a brilliant sequence. It's so well choreographed and so well photographed. One of my favorite shots of the film is when the drill bit falls, kills the other man, and then Daniel Plainview is hiding. And he's just like realizing he just almost died. And he's kind of blended in with the oil in the background, oil all over the walls, oil below him by his waist. Because like it looks like what they're wearing is like leather outfits, some kind to help prevent too much oil from dripping on them from above from the buckets. But he's covered in oil, just completely covered in oil, and he like seamlessly blends in like a chameleon into the oil of the background, which I really love. I love that shot.
Just his eyes visible.
Exactly. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it was a tough life, I'm sure. You know, a lot of people did a lot of tough work, dying, building things like this and discovering things. And
I mean, 6-year-olds were working in coal factories.
I mean, just imagine what it was like being in one of those pits and trying to breathe, like the shot where Daniel's like trying to get air, because he almost faints just because of the fumes of, you're surrounded by oil. You're waist deep in oil.
Yeah.
That's insane. But it's an incredible sequence, and no dialogue for the first 10, 11 minutes is just so incredible.
It's so impressive.
Yeah,
it's
really
so
is.
impressive.
You don't need dialogue, man.
I mean, there are a couple words said. He just says no a couple of times when he falls and breaks his leg. That's it. But I mean, other than that, there's no dialogue.
Yeah, I love it because it's a character that we respect in the first act. In he makes a lot of mistakes, almost dies, but his resilience, his determination, and his resolve are what make him such a really fascinating character. Because how many people would have just given up if they broke their leg at the bottom of a pit? They would have just died. They would have accepted their fate, just stayed at the bottom of that pit. They wouldn't have had the strength to get up that ladder. And then they wouldn't have had the strength to drag themselves with one leg to a freaking town that was who knows how many miles away in the desert. How long did it take him? How many people would have actually done that and survived?
It's his willingness to suffer. You know what I mean? To really suffer and just keep moving.
It's because his ambition is wild.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's otherworldly, his ambition and his greed and what he wants to achieve. Mm-hmm. It's a great character.
Yeah. It's a pretty cool character.
Pretty cool guy.
Man,
you got anything else?
I can't think of anything else.
Because we're almost 3 hours in on this,
Holy
baby.
crap. Man, what an
episode. Jinx. Wow.
No, yeah, I mean, I think I got everything in my notes.
Same. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this super long episode and breakdown of There Will Be Blood, one of our favorites, one of the best films of the century, one of the best films of all time. Really hope you enjoyed it. Definitely become a patron today at patreon.com/Raiders of Lost Podcast. It is the very best way to support the show. We appreciate you all so much for tuning in around the world. Take care. Have a wonderful day.
Drainage!
I told you I would eat you. This episode was executive produced by our chosen one patrons, Cody Moen, Andrew Hagan, Becca Keene, Benjamin Cook, Calvin Murphy-Griggs, Nicholas Martin, Darian, Tyler McFly, and Sal Koching. Our chosen one patrons are our biggest supporters. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching Raiders of the Lost Podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well, notifications for sure. Listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you can listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out this other content we have on our YouTube channel.